people were in the system in England at the end of March, 4% higher than the year before. There are concerns about more violent scenes in Paris today as national strikes continue for a fourth day. Yesterday, riot police fired tear gas as the demos against President Macron's planned pension reforms took place. And the world's largest private collection of whiskey will go under the hammer in February. The haul of almost 4,000 bottles is expected to fetch up to £8 million. As for the weather, strong winds are expected to hit the UK today as Storm Atia sweeps in over the course of the afternoon. The Met Office has issued a yellow warning for severe gales for West Wales and the southwest of England.
Talk Radio Sports Update.
Anthony Joshua is a world heavyweight champion once again after beating Andy Ruiz with a unanimous points victory in Saudi Arabia. Joshua joins a small group of boxers, including Muhammad Ali, to have reclaimed the world heavyweight title. Manchester City's manager Pep Guardiola admits it's unrealistic to even think about catching Liverpool and retaining the Premier League title. City find themselves 14 points behind the leaders after their 2-1 derby defeat by United. Liverpool beat Bournemouth 3-0. And this season's first piece of Scottish silverware is up for grabs today as Rangers take on Celtic in the League Cup final at Hampden Park. That's the latest.
Talk Radio.
Across the UK, online and on DAB Digital Radio.
Talk Politics with Alexis Conran on Talk Radio. Hello, good morning and welcome to Talk Politics with me, Alexis Conran, here on Talk Radio. This is it. This is the last one. Next Talk Politics, we will know who has won the election, or possibly not. Maybe we'll be entering the bartering stage of who's going to try and form a government after the election, all to play for. Joining me this week, I'm very happy to see the return of Sam Lister, Deputy Political Editor at the Daily Express. Nice to have you back, Sam. Thank you for coming back. And James Meadway, former Labour advisor to John McDonnell, is also back. Welcome back, James.
Good morning.
Lots to get through this morning. A reminder to those of you listening that you can watch us live streamed on our Twitter feed, Facebook feed, and on our YouTube channel. You can get in touch with the show. You can speak to myself, Sam, and James at any time by dialing 0344 499 1000. That is the number that you need. Or you could tweet us any of your thoughts at Talk Radio. The question we're asking you this morning is, what do you hope to wake up to on Friday morning? Friday the 13th. It's sort of not a perfect. I mean, it's a great, perfect headline. I think for this, the Mail on Sunday have really gone for it today with their headline regarding Friday the 13th. But yes, what do you hope to wake up to next Friday the 13th is our question to you. You can tweet us your answer at Talk Radio. You can even text the word talk to 87222 followed by your message. Or better yet, pick up the phone and tell us what you would like to see on that Friday the 13th as a result of the general election taking place on Thursday. 0344 499 1000. That is the number that you need. Well, both of you, 3 days to go. Mm-hmm. From what the polling has been spitting out, we've had 4 or 5 polls come out yesterday. Huge variety from one. I think there was a Comres poll which had the gap being 6% to 11 or 12% on some of the other ones, the YouGov poll, etc. Still a lot of fluctuation. So John Curtis from the University of Strathclyde was on television this morning, and he did make that big caveat that none of the polling could take in tactical voting, and tactical voting seems to have been a much bigger thing than it's ever been on any other general election. So you can't take that into account. It seems to be that it's still all to play for, James.
I think so. I mean, it's uncannily similar to 2017 in terms of where the polls are. If you think of certainly the last set just before the election in 2017, you had a huge spread. I think it was up to a 12-point Tory lead down to a 2-point Tory lead. That was roughly where things were landing then. What you've seen throughout the whole campaign is, if you take the kind of average of the polls, it's the gap between Labour and Tories is closer to roughly comparable rates to what happened in 2017. There's a lot of parallels of what's going on there. The big complicating factor in all this is, well, 2 things really, 3 things. things, actually. One is tactical voting. You mentioned the polling just doesn't pick that up. Thank you. The other is that you have very large numbers of undecideds still, like really, really large numbers of undecideds. We know from 2017 that over a third, actually, just over a third of Labour voters only decided to vote Labour in the last sort of week or so of the campaign. So it's a similar kind of issue of lots and lots of people making their mind up relatively late on in proceedings. And I think also there's this very large number of registrations and the potential for turnout to be quite interesting, particularly with younger voters, which again polling companies may or may not be picking up on quite as effectively as they would like. So it does really genuinely look quite open at this point in time.
Sam, 3 days to go, really. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday before people go to the polls. Can anything be done to change or steer people's minds? I mean, we are seeing, we're going to talk about it a little bit later on, but the cover of the Sunday Times has got a big story about leaked documents from Labour highlighting still the undying issue of anti-Semitism. I'm sure there's going to be attempts from both sides to smear their opponents. It's a shame it's always usually a smear rather than, hey, actually, why don't you lend us your vote because here's something good that might happen, rather than don't vote for those other people, they're nasty. But Sam, do you think that there is still a lot to play for in these last 3 days?
It's all to play for, and I think John Curtis has talked about how if the poll lead is down to 6 points, you've got a 50-50 chance of a hung parliament. And we saw in 2017 that actually on the day, 8 out of 10 voters went to one of the two main parties. The small party vote just collapsed. And I think we're probably back into that territory again, where people realise you've got to pick a side, and they're going to pick, that ultimately they will go for either Labour or Tories, that the smaller parties will probably collapse again. So I think it is all to play for, and a lot of people haven't decided yet how they're going to vote. So in these final few days, I think what we'll see is the two main parties will double down on their messages. I don't think you'll particularly see anything new. You will hear over and over and over again, get Brexit done, from the Tories, and from Labour you will hear, I'm sure, lots of claims about how the Tories are going to flog off the NHS. And I think that will be on a loop now for the next few days as they're trying to win over their base.
Yeah, and also trading barriers between Northern Ireland and the rest of the UK. So you think that you don't think there's going to be any new offerings, perhaps? Labour have been very, very happy to sort of pick stuff and go, yeah, we'll do that.
They have.
How will you pay for it?
They put out a fully costed manifesto, and then 3 days later added on 58 billion for the WASPy women.
The WASPy women.
Yeah. So, but I think at this stage in the game, it's about refining and just repeating your message in those final few days, just drumming it home to voters what your pitch is. It's a bit late in the day to start flying new policies around.
We've been asking the question, what do you hope to wake up to next Friday? Gary Mills, I don't think quite has got the hang of it. He says, hopefully a clear head, as it's our Christmas party on Thursday night. Gary, I hear your pain, but I was kind of asking about the election. There's plenty of your messages piling in. I will be getting to those in a second, but keep them coming. At Talk Radio is the Twitter handle you need. Remember, you can watch us live on our Twitter feed, our Facebook feed, and on our YouTube channel. And your comments, we will put them, if they get handed to me, the acceptable ones, and I will be reading them out. But remember, you can pick up the phone and tell us your thoughts. 0344 499 1000 is the number you need. Some of you have already started calling in. We'll get to your calls in a second. Highlights of the week past. James, can you pick one?
There's two really, and one's a bit of a weird one, but I hope you'll bear with me on it. Which is the first one is as mentioned, the flourishing of documents by Jeremy Corbyn, leaked Treasury documents demonstrating that Boris Johnson, when he says there will be no checks between Northern Ireland and Great Britain, in fact, his own Treasury department says this isn't entirely true. In fact, there will be checks, and then a sort of fuss around that, and also raising the issue of how much can we trust of what Boris Johnson says in any given sets of issues at one point in time. It's obviously why Labour's raising this. But the other one was something else. It was actually a story in the Guardian, which was an account of doing some research of how people actually consume news during the election now. Now that we all have, I've got a smartphone sitting in front of me, there's any number of different news channels, there's Facebook, there's all these things. And it was interesting because they did quite a detailed study of how people are reading the news. And instead of, you all sit down to watch the BBC or whatever it might be, people are reading bits of news, they're getting videos online. You can see some of the most viewed videos out there aren't from any of the major news channels. There's the Rob Delaney video, saying defend the NHS, vote for Labour. 10 million or so views the last time I checked. And that's how people are seeing these things. So instead of getting sort of a big picture story, a lot of this is slightly subterranean in terms of how people are seeing the election. And that, I think, is a character of this slightly odd feel if you sit in the middle of it. And if you're writing for the national press and things, a lot of the action's happening elsewhere. It's something you don't quite see.
Well, Sam, you're writing for the national press. What do you have to say on what James has just said?
That's completely true. And I think the campaign on both sides has been quite sterile. From a national journalist point of view, we don't really get to see them unleashed very often. It's all very staged, and that's how both sides want it. So, yeah, I think James is absolutely right there. There's a lot going on that we aren't really part of.
In terms of highlights of the week, Sam, have you got something that you'd like to pick?
Yeah, just on that theme of how sterile the campaign has been, the one big part of the week for me that was actually quite chaotic and, from a journalist point of view, quite good fun to cover was the Brexit Party's wrangling, infighting, implosion when 4 of its MEPs quit quite dramatically. We got this press call, come over to 1 Great George Street in 2 hours, this big announcement, and basically Annunciata Rees-Mogg, Jacob Rees-Mogg's sister, John Longworth, prominent businessman, and 2 other MEPs decided to quit the party.
Jacob Rees-Mogg's sister is quitting the party in order to support the
Conservatives. So make of that what you will.
Very strange. I wonder what's going on there.
So we had this strange... We arrived and the Brexit Party's press officer was there doing his own sub-briefing, which delayed the actual press conference where they were announcing that they were quitting. And it was all very chaotic, quite a bun fight. We had one of the MEPs who was quitting was in tears. It was all very emotional. And just, in this very staged campaign, it was quite an interesting point in the week where actually, there's one party that isn't quite as disciplined as the others, and that's the Brexit Party.
It is a bit strange that certainly I've noticed that this seems to be one of the first elections, because we've had quite a few recently, that Nigel Farage seems a little bit insignificant at the moment. There was a lot of significance to start with, was the Brexit Party going to stand against the Conservatives. But since he's done his U-turn from hating Boris Johnson's withdrawal agreement to somehow accepting it and not standing against the Conservatives, it seems sort of almost like a spent force. He's not standing, therefore there isn't a sort of, will he win his seat? Will he not win the seat? I don't think anyone's even considering the Brexit Party winning a seat to come into Parliament. It may, of course, happen. Anything can happen on Thursday. But it feels that Nigel Farage is sort of somehow irrelevant in this conversation now.
Well, I think that's a fair point. I think it's it's partly his own fault. So I'm not going to... Hardly Nigel Farage's greatest fan, but one of the things he always had going for him is he knew where he stood, and he stood up, and he was prepared to say what he believed in. This sudden turn to saying, let's all support the Conservative Party now, I think really did him damage personally. And you can see the anger it provoked amongst Brexit Party supporters and some of their candidates and this sort of thing. I mean, they are still, obviously the Brexit Party themselves are busy talking up their chances in a couple of places, places in the northeast, there's a couple in Yorkshire, that sort of thing. But it does feel like very much a sort of spent force, and that exactly as Sam said, that like you saw in 2017, this is an election where the 2 main parties are lined up and people are making a choice on that kind of basis. Perhaps this time with a bit more tactical voting, perhaps with a bit more of a Lib Dem vote in some places. Obviously a different dynamic in Scotland with the SNP there, but that seems to be what's happening, and the smaller parties getting really decisively squeezed.
We were asking the question, what do you hope to wake up to next Friday morning? Quite a few of your answers here. We have Mr. Rushmere on Twitter says, anything that doesn't involve the Tories. Bill on Twitter says, a substantial Conservative majority and a significantly reduced representation of the SNP in the House of Commons. The SNP seem to be very solid in Scotland. I don't think there's a question that they're going to be the biggest party in Scotland, much to the disappointment of Labour, because that's where Labour used to have some of their core base. And we have seen that Labour have found it harder to get a majority since the SNP have been growing. There was the question of the Conservative seats up there. I think there's about 13
That sounds about
13,
right, yeah.
and I think they're on track to actually hold most of those, not all.
Right.
And at the beginning of this election, we thought actually the Conservative vote in Scotland was likely to collapse. Obviously, Ruth Davidson decided to stand down, and she was so powerful up there. She was, she's such a charismatic leader. She's turned around the party's fortunes in Scotland. But I think actually what's happened is you have to work out, are you a unionist or do you want independence? And again, it's a bit like the Brexit decision. Are you a Leaver or are you a Remainer? In Scotland, you've got to decide, are you pro-union or do you want independence? And it's either the Conservatives or the SNP, depending on where you are. And Labour just really aren't in the game on that.
James, do Labour stand any chance of regaining their former glories in Scotland?
Well, the issue for Labour is I think that similarly to what's happening around any questions around Brexit in England and Wales, is that if we can say to people, if Labour can say to people, look, there's a whole load of other issues you should care about, and there's a record, and I think Andrew Neil's interview did a good job with Nicola Sturgeon dragging out some of the SNP's record in government. There's a record here, there is a problem of austerity. What does independence mean as the SNP now talk about it? Their own growth commission makes clear that austerity basically continues. You can try and present some of that, and you can try and say that, look, we're going to stand for like the bread and butter issues that might matter to people on a day-to-day basis. That's what Labour's standing for. I do think, looking ahead, I think there is a longer-term issue with Labour sorting out what it thinks about some of these constitutional questions and addressing the fact that you haven't seen in Scotland in quite the same way this big surge of younger voters, younger supporters for the Labour Party. It has happened, but it's not as big. And I think some of that is to do with the impact of the independence vote in the campaign there. So I think there's a bit of thinking that needs to be done for Scottish Labour, I'd say, at this point in time in terms of resolving that.
OK, we're going to take a quick break, but then we're going to come back to quite a lot of your messages that are piling in and hopefully speak to one of you who has called in. 0344 499 1000 is the number that you need to have a chat with myself, James and Sam. You could tweet us your thoughts at Talk Radio. We're asking the question, what do you hope you will wake up to next Friday morning? No jokes about Christmas parties and hangovers. Someone's got there before you already. And you've been reminded that you can watch us live streamed on our Twitter feed at Talk Radio, on our Facebook page and on our YouTube channel. The time is now 19 minutes past 10.
This is Talk Radio. The Alexis Conran Show on Talk Radio with The Times and The Sunday Times. Know your times.
Your old car, your loyal friend, so many memories. It's impossible to leave their side.
Until now, get £5,000 off a selected brand new Citroën when you trade in your old car.
Alors, out with the old, in with the new. Hello Citroën, hello comfort.
The Citroën Swappage. Trade in your old car for a brand new Citroën, including the award-winning SUV range.
Citroën.
Discount on OTR price of selected Citroëns excluding C1. Registered by the 31st of December when trading in a qualifying vehicle. Not in conjunction with other offers. Search Citroën Swappage for full T's and C's.
At Homebase, get half price on all kitchen units when you buy 5 or more, plus an extra 10% off your kitchen until December 15th. Exclusions at homebase.co.uk.
Emma, this is for you. Thanks, Mum. It's got a fabulous set of cameras. Ultra-wide lens and everything.
Jan.
And this is for you, Jack.
Thanks, Mum.
It tracks your heartbeat. Isn't that clever?
Jan, honestly.
I love these are for you.
Oh, thanks.
They're supposed to have amazing base quality.
Mum!
Enjoy cashback on our Samsung Galaxy range, including £100 when you purchase the Galaxy S10e. Shop from our Galaxy range at your local Carphone Warehouse store or carphonewarehouse.com. Purchased by the 25th of December 2019. Claim from Samsung within 30 days of purchase. T's and C's apply.
At Lidl, we're big on the sweetest Christmas and those happily ever afters. Like our winter warmer deluxe mince pie strudel at just $2.99 and our deluxe espresso martini roulade for only $4.99. Big on a Christmas you can believe in. Now that's big on quality and always Lidl on price. Subject to availability, selected stores excludes NI.
Listen up, it's the head teacher here. Please pay attention. We need you all to collect as many Books for Schools tokens and the Sun as possible. When we've got 3,500, the school will get over £600 worth of free books. If you don't, it's detention. Start collecting Books for Schools tokens in the Sun today. T's and C's apply.
Talk Radio, traffic and travel.
In Bristol, the M32 northbound at Junction 2 for Eastville, the main carriageway is currently closed for emergency pothole repairs. Congestion is back to Junction 3. In Warwickshire, on the M6 northbound between Junction 3 for Nuneaton and Junction 4 for Coleshill, Lane 1 remains closed following an accident. In West Yorkshire, on the M1 northbound, we've got a broken down vehicle block blocking lane 1 between junction 39 for Wakefield and junction 40 for Ossett. And in Lancashire on the M6 southbound between junction 33 for Lancaster South and 32 for the M55. Emergency repairs means lane 1 is closed. I'm Michael Payne.
This week at Tesco, buy 2 items from our chilled party food range, like tempura prawns or mozzarella sticks, and get a third one free. So for every 2 people you invite, you can ask another for free. But who? Linda from Accounts or Julio from Magaluf 2010. Tesco, delivering Christmas for 100 years. Cheapest item free, selected stores while stocks last, ends 1st of January.
Outspoken opinions and decisive debate. The Alexis Conran Show on Talk Radio.
Welcome back to the show with me, Alexis Conran, here on Talk Radio. You're listening to Talk Politics with The Times. Be well informed. With me, I have Deputy Political Editor at the Daily Express, Sam Lister, and James Meadway, former Labour advisor to John McDonnell. And we are asking the question, what would you hope to wake up to next Friday morning? You can send us your answers at Talk Radio. You can dial 0344 499 1000 to speak to Alex, to myself, Alex, James and Sam. And Alex, there's too many Alexes, has called us from Plymouth.
Yeah.
Alex, welcome to the show. What would you like to say?
Hi there. Hi. Good morning, everybody.
Morning.
I mean, you put it in terms of what I hope to wake up to on Friday the 13th. My take is this, really. If I don't wake up to a Labour government, if I don't wake up to the Labour government, then I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't know what this country is going to do. It's not just about hope. It's about the fading of hope, really, for a decent, functional society under the Tories.
Do you feel that it's only a Labour government that will change? What would you like to see changed?
Well, there are so many things. I think it is only because the Tories are the people who took us here, right? The 10 years of their stewardship has brought the country to the place it's at now. We can't even handle prevalent weather conditions in this country.
Are you talking about the flooding?
The flooding, yeah, the flooding. We can't even... And my understanding is that about 200 people have been removed from the environmental...
Environment Agency, which looks at the protections in flooding. They have, but then the Conservatives will, and this is what they have been saying in their campaigning, that when they did come into power those 9 years ago, they did have to take some serious actions. We were borrowing, for every £4 we spent, we were borrowing £1. James is way more qualified to talk about this than I am, but they may have done, but they needed to take some sort of action. And austerity wasn't something that was purely a Conservative decision. It was done with the help of the Liberal Democrats. And do you not think that they were right in taking some measures to prevent this country going further and further into debt?
Well, they did have to take action. The action they should have taken was investment. Show me a successful company that has got where it's got today by cutting investment and by draining research and by getting rid of talented people and by starving the workforce. Show me the company that's done that. The investment is what we needed in this country, not the creation of a larger subclass of powerless, impoverished, despairing people. The suicide rate has gone up by 10% in the last 2 years. I don't know, at what point you're going to look at, and in spite of, what the Tories may claim, they have doubled our debt. They have added £1 billion onto our debt. Where has that money gone? They've borrowed an extra £1 billion. Where is the money? Where has it gone? It's in the pockets of bankers and newspaper.
So what do you think that Jeremy Corbyn then offers in order to change all that?
Well, I mean, basically humanity. The guy comes from the position of a humane broker whose emphasis isn't on the maintenance of a society which requires that the top few percent become ever more wealthy, whilst a large section of society have to at the same time become poor, not just because the money has to flow upwards, but because you have to make people so poor that they can't be.
So do you think
it's this one point?
Yeah, go on.
Can I just develop something which isn't often talked about? I've never really heard it talked about, but I think there's a functional aspect to poverty here. It isn't just about making people wealthier who are already wealthy. There's a point about people whose lives are lived day to day, okay, who are putting food on the table, who are terrified of not having enough rent. And that's 25% of the country at the moment. They have less than £100 in the bank. There's a functional aspect to that. These people don't have time to get rid of their government. They don't have time to complain. They don't have time to agitate. And I say we, I mean these people, we, me and others like us, we don't have the time because every day we're scrabbling around for survival. There's a functional aspect to this impoverishment of people. It isn't just about profits because actually a lot of the time it costs more. We've seen that with the way the welfare, the national insurance system, I won't call it welfare or benefits, it's national insurance. We've seen the way the national insurance system has been pulled around and changed, and the way people with physical disability have had so much taken away from them, and how when they can appeal, when they do appeal, I think about 80% of the cases, the government has to revert back to a proper decision. We've seen that actually costs the government money. It costs taxpayers money. We've seen how wars cost us money. It costs taxpayers money. You know, all this stuff, it doesn't necessarily make people richer. It just creates a society where the large majority or a large minority of people are completely rendered powerless.
Okay. Alex, I'm going to have to leave it there. I hope you understand that I've got plenty of other callers as well to get on, but I think I gave you a very, very big uninterrupted moment to get your thoughts there. Sam, people like Alex looking for the reparations of what they see the effects of austerity have happened. Labour, perhaps costed, uncosted, are putting ideas in their manifesto to solve certain problems that austerity have caused. The Conservatives, the rumour was that the rule for the Conservative manifesto was, if in doubt, leave it out. A lot of 2017's election disaster was blamed on the things like the dementia tax and all those things that really played quite badly. For someone like Alex, do you think that the Conservatives have presented enough in that manifesto to solve some of the problems that Alex was talking about there? That huge array of people with less than £100 in the bank, literally living on the gig economy, making ends meet with pence to spare at the end of the month. Have the Conservatives put enough forward to say, look, vote for us and we'll solve these problems? We have the answers for you.
Well, I think obviously, Boris Johnson has been Prime Minister since July, and so over that time he has actually already started the process of making changes. So we've seen Sajid Javid announce plans for a living wage of £10.50. Mm-hmm. I mean, that was pre the election, and obviously during the election he's announced plans for extra nurses, more police. There's been an actual acknowledgement that austerity has it's done its job and now it's time to move on. And I think so. Actually, this weekend he's given an interview to the Daily Mail where he talked about how he is perhaps more like Michael Heseltine than Margaret Thatcher, in that he believes in investing in infrastructure to revitalise the country. So I think there was a definite shift away from the Cameron era to investing in public services and in infrastructure and trying to make people's living standards higher.
Well, that didn't work for the last 9 years. I mean, Boris Johnson can't walk away from the record of the Conservatives, of which he was a senior member,
okay,
right?
Is there a room for... Because Boris Johnson has spoken about this plenty of times when he is confronted with the record of the last 9 years of the Conservative government, is it acceptable, in your view, James, that he says, well, look, I've only been in power since July?
Absolutely not. At what point did he, in those 9 years, as Mayor of London or as a senior Conservative MP or as somebody with a newspaper column and all the other forums that he's had, at what point did he pop up and say, actually, austerity is a bad idea? This is 130,000 people whose deaths are associated with austerity
120,000.
120,000, thank you. At what point did he say any of this during those 9 years? He had plenty of time to do it. There were plenty of people saying austerity is a bad idea. There is a consensus amongst economists by this point, from the International Monetary Fund to the OECD, to any economist you care to mention, bar a fringe, that austerity just didn't work. It didn't work in economic terms. We don't have an economy that works in the way that it should be doing. Real wages today, for most people, average real wages are lower now than they were in 2008. You can see the homelessness outside. So it's absolutely nonsense of Boris Johnson to turn around and say, oh, well, I've only been Prime Minister for a little bit, never mind me. And actually, what was he saying? That clip of him telling everyone, boasting that there was nobody who did more to defend the bankers than himself as a politician. That's what Boris Johnson stood for. And so then to try and realise that this is now really quite seriously unpopular because people look at the country and see the mess that it's in after 9 years and say, oh, I'm just going to walk away from it. Well, he's trying his best, but that's why there's a real fight in this election, because I don't think everybody's buying it. That's why there's a real fight over the next few days.
You referred there, this was a report which surfaced in November 2017. This was a report that was claiming that 120,000 unnecessary deaths were happening every year because of austerity. Now, Full Fact looked into this, and a reminder that Will Moy from Full Fact will be joining us after the 12 o'clock news for a full hour for our usual fact-checking of the election claims. Now, Full Fact looked at that report, and this is what they had to say, and I'm going to read this out from Full Fact because I don't want there to be... because I think a lot of people read that claim and have their own opinions. This is what actual fact-checkers who looked into it said. An academic paper has estimated that there were around 120,000 more deaths in total between 2010 and 2017 that there would have been had the mortality rate between 2001 and 2010 continued. Restrictions on health and social care spending is one of a number of possible explanations for this, and the findings need to be treated with a bit of caution. So there is something there, but it may not be the exact smoking...
Well, what do you think it is otherwise?
Well,
this is what the statistical evidence tells you. And what you then have to do is interpret that. Now, I think it's a legitimate interpretation to say that if you impose the worst cuts for generations on public services in this country, then it's a legitimate interpretation of those statistics to say that austerity is to blame. That's a basic social scientific way of looking at statistics and then understanding the world on top of it. And it's perfectly reasonable for people to say it's 120,000 excess deaths over that period of time as a result of austerity.
Sam, do you think that excuse cuts for you? Boris Johnson has only been in power for 100 days. I mean, he's pulled that out a few times. I did giggle a little bit again. I think in one of the speeches that he was making, he likes to pick items, topics that people can relate to. My favourite one was the kipper. That he waved around saying, look, this kipper has to be packed in various things because the EU tells us it has to. Of course, it turns out that was a complete lie. It's UK law that actually forced the kipper to be packed in one particular way. The one recently that someone pointed out, which, again, we've come to the point now where it's not surprising, but he keeps going on about the tampon tax. You know, we need to leave the EU, get Brexit done, to get rid of the tampon tax. Guess whether or not Boris Johnson was part of the group of MPs who voted against an amendment to scrap the tampon tax. I'll give you one guess. Did he vote to scrap it, or did he vote to keep it?
Well, I can guess from your question what the answer is.
He voted to keep it. You know, they had a chance. And actually, can I just say that there were 3 Tory rebels? So people did rebel against that. But Boris Johnson wasn't one of them. So I'm interested in this idea of, look, I've only just taken over now, therefore my past record cannot be associated with what I'm going to do in the future. Did that stand as a political excuse?
Well, obviously, he was part of the Theresa May government for a period of time, so he can't completely disassociate himself from what happened.
Oh, so it didn't prevent him from voting against Theresa May's withdrawal agreement 3 times, twice actually.
Well, obviously, he walked out after the Chequers element, didn't he? So So you can't completely disassociate yourself from your time in government, but there is a very different position from being part of a government or being a backbench MP to setting the direction of your party. And he's positioned himself as a very different Conservative Prime Minister to Theresa May. And, you know, he's now in charge. He can set the direction, and he's setting a different direction. He's spending more money. The manifesto is quite bare bones compared to Theresa May's, but the direction is completely different. So I think, you know, fine, you can't disassociate yourself from it, but he's now in charge. And
The Institute of Fiscal Studies, you know, who usually pop up in these sort of debates, say that austerity is baked in as a result of the Conservative manifesto. It's a small change. It's not enough to actually undo the damage of the last few years. I mean, take school spending. School spending per pupil, if the Conservatives actually put in place the money they say they're going to put in, will get you back to the level of 2010. So in other words, by 2023. So you've had 13 years of sort of going around in a big circle on it, right? This isn't good enough, really. I mean, it's a change of a bit, and it's a move of a slight, as you realise it's unpopular.
The IFS,
it doesn't do enough.
The IFS, if we want to go down the IFS route, were pretty critical of the Labour manifesto.
Yeah, pretty critical of the Tory manifesto.
And the fact that 3 days later they announced £58 billion of uncosted spending. And the fact that Jeremy Corbyn promised that only the highest taxpayers would face tax rises under a Labour government, which is absolutely not true.
It's the promise was more. The top 5% would be facing increases in the poorest 95% would face no increases in basic income tax, in VAT, and national insurance.
But they would face increases for an increase in corporation tax, for the loss of certain benefits.
That's an argument about incidence on corporation tax, and there's a lot of backwards and forwards about that. The IFS itself has been quite rightly criticised for going a bit too heavy on where incidence of corporation tax.
But James, you understand though that you can't bring the IFS in and go, well, look, they said that austerity was baked in, but also, if you're going to listen to the IFS have been scathing about Labour's spending commitment, saying it's completely unreasonable.
And other economists disagree with that. It's the nature of economics. This isn't things that are set in stone. It's always an argument. And the IFS have one version of the argument, and actually on the austerity being baked in, it's perfectly clear from the Tory figures that this is what's going to happen. There isn't much serious dispute about that. On the more speculative parts, about where corporation tax ends up, what impact it has on investment, the IFS has been quite rightly criticised by other economists. 163 signed a letter to the Financial Times just a few weeks ago saying Labour's plans make sense. So there is clearly a dispute around some of this. But to think that the Conservative Party right now is making a genuine break with its own past, I don't think that's the case at all. Indeed, if you look at something like what's lined up and what they're trying to deny around the post-Brexit trade deal with the US, and it's very clear from the leaked papers that this is going to be about selling off the NHS, because that is the big offer that they can make to the US out of it. It's very, very clear. 2 stories today, one in the Times, one in the Guardian, about data, NHS data being taken by large tech companies. What is said over and over again in those papers is that the US wants free access to NHS data and other sources of data in this country. That's a hugely valuable resource now.
OK, Sam, you're saying that's not true?
It's not true. The papers, which seem to have come via Russia...
What can I stop you on that one just quickly? No, because I'm interested in what you have to say. But why is it important where the papers have come from? The papers are there. I mean, if and I know Boris Johnson was quoted as sort of saying we must find out where those papers have come from. Sorry, that wasn't me trying to do a Boris voice, but you know, we're talking about a Prime Minister who's refused to release a report on Russian meddling, all of a sudden telling us, well, has there been Russian meddling in these papers? This seems slightly two-faced, but if the papers are there and they are genuine, does it matter where they've come from?
Well, if Corbyn wants to put out... do Russia's work for him.
But what is Russia's work?
Russia just wants to meddle in Western politics and disrupt and cause chaos.
By prominent Russians connected to Putin giving large donations to the Conservative Party, for example.
I think besmirching Russians who live in London is quite... you know, on the basis of nothing.
But my question as a sort of a non-partisan commentator is, if the report is there, I don't particularly care whether Russia have released it. If it's manufactured and if it's faked and if it's fake news, released by Russia to confuse us all, then I totally understand your point. But if that report was wherever it's been, if it's a genuine report and it tells us, for example, the genuine conversation that have been had by US trade officials and UK trade officials, I totally accept that a conversation could be had, but that doesn't necessarily mean that those things are going to happen when we actually do our trade deal. But why are we getting stuck on where this report has come from rather than what's in it?
Well, just because we've now found out where it's come from. So
but why is that important? That's my question.
If
it's genuine,
why do you think Russia
important?
are putting these things out? They're trying to interfere.
But it's a genuine report, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm not disputing it's a
right,
genuine report.
So the real issue here is the content of a genuine report.
In the report, it makes no mention of selling off the NHS.
Well, it doesn't say we're going to sell off the NHS. We don't have to read it that closely to think, well, hang on, if they're talking about free access to data, what is the largest repository of data that's currently not available, or mostly not available to US tech companies? It's the NHS data.
There's nothing
and they say
in
they want
it.
free flows of information. They say they don't want data localization. In plain English, they want to be able to take the data and use it themselves. 2 reports in the papers today, reputable papers reporting that this is already happening.
Is
So of
there
course
anything
it's going
in
to
it
accelerate.
that says the UK has agreed to do any of this?
What it
No,
says is
it
that
hasn't.
the talks have taken place. What it says.
There's nothing in it that says the UK would do
But
any
this
of this.
wasn't the trade. This wasn't the actual trade negotiation. This was a meeting, from what I've understood, and correct me if I'm wrong, a meeting of. These are the areas that we would both be interested in discussing to talk about. Now, it could very well be that the UK trade envoy arrives and says, right, nothing about the NHS is on the table. That may well happen. It also may well happen that the US envoys may stand up and go and say, well, then you're not going to get a trade deal. However, the idea that it has not been discussed is now categorically false due to those papers.
But there is nothing in those papers that says in any way, shape or form that the UK is willing to do anything to sell off the NHS. It's just not true. And also, if you look at talk about patents, obviously America's quite keen on extending medical patents because they want companies to make more money out of it. Well, the UK government has just been locked in a battle with an American drugs company, Vertex, over Orkambi, which is a wonder drug for people with cystic fibrosis. And it's been locked in a battle for a year to bring down the price of that drug, which eventually happened. Why would it do? Why would it go to those lengths and then agree to put up the price of drugs? It just wouldn't do that. It just makes no sense.
Here's where I get stuck, and I put my hands up and say I do not have a great business mind. I've got a great cheating, deception mind, because that was my hustling background, but not a great business mind, which should tell you a lot. But in my mind, once we're free of the European Union and when we've left and we sit down with the EU and the US, which are the 2 biggest trade deals we're going to do, from what I understand, size is important. You've got just over 500 million consumers in the EU trade bloc, and you've got 300 and almost 400 million consumers in the US. And I just don't see how we sit at that table, and one of the biggest sort of assets that we have, something that people can really make money off of and sort of benefit from trade, is our NHS. And we're going to go, you know, that big thing that you want access to, well, that's off the table now. I mean, I just don't see how that would work in a trade deal, especially with the US, who will want to get a benefit from doing a trade deal with us. Let's not forget, we've all been very sort of UK-centric about how we're going to benefit from all these great deals. We've got to remember that bigger countries, bigger than us, they're going to want to benefit from us. And if we take one of our biggest assets off the table, I just don't understand how that works in a negotiation.
Well, Boris Johnson and Donald Trump have both said it's not part of the negotiations.
I think whatever Donald Trump says, we might as well ask the cat. But Donald Trump has said both that the NHS is on the table when he stood next to Theresa May. Then he said it's off the table. Then he said even if it was offered on a platter to him, he doesn't want it. I mean, I think we can safely... And also, it's not really up to Donald Trump. It's going to be up to Congress. So I think I could take Boris Johnson at his word. Well, I'm trying to, that he says it's not going to be on the table. But again, I'm just kind of thinking, if you're going to go there and you're not going to take the crown jewels to the table, what are you going to get in this free trade agreement?
Why would a government in in the UK, where the NHS is the absolute heart and soul of the country, put it on the table. They're never going to win an election again, are they? It would be absolutely ludicrous.
Governments frequently do things that are unpopular. I mean, Royal Mail privatisation, I remember being nobody wanted Royal Mail privatisation. Government did it anyway. And if you want to chop up the NHS, you don't just take it lock, stock and barrel and go, here you go, America, here's the whole lot, do your worst. You find ways around it. So it's why the talk in the documents is about pharmaceutical pricing, which we know that there's a heavy pressure to do something about the NHS powers to control that. They want to get rid of this. That's why the documents talk about data and access to data, because they know they want to get hold of the NHS's incredibly valuable health records and generate research out of it.
But as I just said, you just have to look at the government's record on drug pricing, as we've seen from the
and then it's the government's record in a trade deal where it is, as it says, it is the weakest partner. We will be the weak partner in this, and we will have not much else to offer. Trade with the US is already pretty brisk, very brisk. So what else is there? What are the other gains you get? It has to be the NHS.
I've got to stop it there because I've got to go to a break. I've been hounded by my producer in my ear because we've got to pay the rent and we've got to play the adverts. We're still asking the question, what do you hope to wake up to next Friday morning? You can tweet us, as loads of you have done, at Talk Radio and on our Facebook page, where you can watch us live streamed on Twitter, Facebook and YouTube. I will get back to your messages and also to your calls. 0344 499 1000 is the number you need if you want to comment on anything you've heard so far and speak to Sam, James and myself. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be straight back after this.
Across the UK, online and on DAB.
We are
Talk Radio.
The Alexis Conran Show on Talk Radio with The Times and The Sunday Times. Know your times.
Today, it's Aston Villa v Leicester and Brighton v Wolves in a cracking double-header. And with Now TV, you can watch both games live for a one-off payment of just $9.99. Hold on, they're checking with VAR.
That's confirmed. It's $9.99.
Good call. Game on. So, to only pay for the games that matter to you, grab a Now TV Sky Sports Day Pass. Search Now TV Sports. 18 plus, content streamed via internet. Full terms apply.
Your online life is slick and on point. Just how you like it. Except your email. That's a right mess. Chaos. The new Yahoo Mail app will sort all of that out. Gmail account, AOL, Outlook, stick them all on there. Looking for something? Boom! There it is. Need that ticket right now? Whoa! It's already there. And you can unsubscribe from the junk in one tap. We've rethought your email and your life just got tidier. Download the Yahoo Mail app now.
Ho, ho, ho. Who's made a list this year? I want a new phone. One with amazing cameras, ultra-wide lens, of course, live focus video. Well, it has to be 5G ready to stream all my films. Can it come with something awesome to listen to them through?
Darling, I think he was talking to the kids.
Get everything you want and more. Purchase a Samsung 5G ready device and claim a pair of silver wireless Galaxy Buds at no extra cost. Shop our 5G handsets in store or online at your local Vodafone store or vodafone.co.uk. 18 plus. Offer excludes Galaxy Fold 5G. Purchased by the 25th of the 12/19. Claim from Samsung within 30 days. T's and C's apply.
So, Minister, do you really think you can lower taxes and increase funding for the NHS?
Get an in-depth look at all the party's spending promises. From the NHS to house building, The Times and The Sunday Times will guide you through. Pick up your copy today or visit thetimes.co.uk.
Talk Radio, traffic and travel.
There are delays on the M5 northbound in Somerset between junction 21 for Weston-super-Mare and junction 20 because of a police investigation blocking a lane. In Bristol, there are delays on the M32 northbound at junction 2 for Eastville. That's because of emergency pothole repairs. Delays back to junction 3. In Essex, on the M25 clockwise at junction 27 for the M11, we've got delays because of the outside lane closures for barrier repairs. And in Lancashire, on the M6 southbound between junction 33 and 32, emergency repairs are blocking one lane. I'm Michael Page.
This week at Tesco, buy 2 items from our chilled party food range, like tempura prawns or mozzarella sticks, and get a third one free. So for every 2 people you invite, you can ask another for free. But who? Linda from Accounts or Julio from Magaluf 2010. Tesco, delivering Christmas for 100 years. Cheapest item free, selected stores while stocks last, ends 1st of January.
Across the UK, online and on DAB.
The Matthew Wright Show, tomorrow afternoon from 1 on Talk Radio.
I'm Matthew Wright. Join me on Talk Radio. I'll be shaking up your afternoons with 3 hours of original current affairs conversation, unfiltered comment, and irreverent opinion.
Putting the world to rights. The Matthew Wright Show. Tomorrow afternoon from 1.
Always look on the right side of life.
On Talk Radio. Outspoken opinions and decisive debate. The Alexis Conran Show on Talk Radio.
Welcome back to the show with me, Alexis Conran, here on Talk Radio. You're listening to Talk Politics with the Times. Be well informed. With me, I have Sam Lister and James Meadway. And I'm delighted to say, joined on the line, we are joined by Dr. Adrian Heald. He's Labour candidate for Mid-Norfolk. Welcome to the show.
Thanks. It's great to be on the show, Alexis. Again, it's good to talk.
Thank you for giving us your time this morning. I guess, how are you feeling with all the polls coming out? You're still behind, and the only thing that I've been taught about polls is you've got to look at the trend. And the trend seems to be that Labour are, in some polls, catching up, in some polls still exactly where they were when we first started the campaign. Very similar numbers to the 2017 numbers at this point of the campaign. Do polls make a difference to the way you run your campaign on the ground?
Of course, it makes a difference. It's always good to see the polls closing, and we're seeing, as you said, the same kind of phenomenon that we saw in June 2017 in terms of the gap closing. So it just means we keep pushing on. We contact as many people as possible, both face-to-face and using telephone canvassing and obviously social media as well. So I'm keeping going until close of play on the Wednesday of this week, on the 11th of December, and all other candidates and their teams will be across the country.
Are you preparing yourselves for the next 3 days in what seems to be an inevitable onslaught of more stories hitting the Labour Party from various areas of the press? I can refer to one in the Sunday Times today, which has a cache of secret documents that have been leaked to the Sunday Times. The headline is "Exposed: The Secret Labour Files of Shame. Leaked internal documents reveal shocking delays in tackling new anti-Semitism cases." There's going to be a lot more from that to come. How's the Labour Party prepared to reply? Because essentially what they're doing is they're questioning the Labour leader's claims that everything has been updated, the process is now much quicker, much sharper, and cases are being processed very, very quickly. And from what these documents tell us, that's not really the case.
Well, we're focused at the moment on winning an election on the 12th of December. All of us accept that there are issues that need to be addressed. The Conservative Party also is not without blemish in this
Sure,
area.
but I don't want to be talking about the Conservatives. I'm talking about yourselves at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, we need to focus on the next 3 days, getting the message out to the people. I accept that there are things that need to be addressed. The time to address them is after the 12th of December, not before. You know, we've got a clear agenda for change. We need to present that to the British people as an alternative to what other parties are offering.
But you say the time to address those concerns is after the December the 12th. What we've been discussing here in the studio before we started the show, there's a large number of don't knows, a large number of undecideds. And it's stories like this that could change people's minds in the last 2 or 3 days. When they see and read some of these reports in these papers, they will be disgusted by what they see, and that may very well put people off from walking into a voting booth and putting a cross next to a Labour candidate. So I put it to you that I think these things need to be dealt now, not before, not after the December the 12th. They need to be dealt now, because you want, elections are won and lost on the don't knows, the undecideds.
And I would completely agree with you with regard to the don't knows. I mean, I'm just about to go out campaigning. There are a lot of people still who are saying they are not sure about which way they're going to vote. What is being presented in the media is not what the Labour Party stands for. It is not what the leader of the Labour Party stands for. There are always going to be people who will behave in a dysfunctional way. You and I know that social media has amplified that hugely in recent years. We absolutely abhor this behaviour. I abhor this behaviour. And it's something that we need to stamp out. But, to be honest, on the doorstep, it's hardly coming up. I've been out campaigning yesterday. We're just about to go campaigning today. You know, it is not the main issue on people's minds. The main issue on people's minds is what kind of country they want to be living in, the matter of our membership of the European Union, and whether they have a government that's investing in public services, not the type of issues that are being brought up in the Sunday Times today.
Okay. In view of what happens, we've been asking people what they would like to see on Friday morning, Friday the 13th. Dare I ask, I think I know the answer to that question from you, what you would like to see, but what do you think you are likely to see?
Well, what I would like to see, Alexis, is a Labour majority government. That can't be achieved for me personally, as a Labour Party candidate. What I want to see is the Tories not getting an overall majority, okay? I am a Remainer, I've always been a Remainer, and what I want to see is that the British people, the people of the United Kingdom, have an opportunity again to look at the matter of our membership of the European Union. If we have a Tory majority government, we've been told very clearly that will not happen. We'll be out on the 31st of January 2020. I think the people of this country, can I finish the point? People of this country deserve that opportunity, and if we don't achieve full majority, the Labour Party will be committed still to delivering that second referendum in a coalition government.
But you do realise that to most people, essentially what you've just said is a Labour government will basically continue the debate. I mean, it's unquestionable that Boris Johnson and the Conservative Party have had a lot of success with their slogan of "Get Brexit Done." And the truth is a Labour government would deliver another referendum and possibly a Scottish referendum on top of that. So are you worried that you are essentially promoting and accentuating this sort of voter fatigue? People have had enough after 3 years. They want this over and done with. They want to move on with their lives.
Well, I'm tired of this strapline, "Get Brexit Done." My strapline is "Rewiring Britain," which is investment in our physical, digital and social infrastructure. With regard to the matter of the referendum, this is the most important issue that we will face in our lifetimes. It has implications for our children and our grandchildren as well. And personally, and it's also the Labour Party position, I believe that we owe it to the British people to present this choice to them again, now that we know far more than we did in June 2016, so that we can make a once-and-for-all decision. This isn't like a general election where we can reverse the decision in 4 or 5 years' time. This is absolutely it. And we have to be certain, as a people, that this is what we want. You know, I said I'm a Remainer. I'm not campaigning about Remain at the moment. I'm simply campaigning for a second referendum. We deserve that. The people of this country deserve that for such an enormous matter that's going to determine not just our economic future, but the way that our country exists in the world in the coming years and decades.
OK. Dr. Adrian Hild, thank you very much for your time. A Labour candidate there for Mid-Norfolk. Also standing in Mid-Norfolk are Lib Dem Stefan Acaron, Conservative George Freeman and Independent PJ O'Gorman. We will, of course, be speaking to a Conservative candidate in the next hour. Tobias Elwood will be joining us after 11:30. You can continue to watch us on our YouTube page and on our Twitter feed and Facebook page. Please keep your messages coming in. We are asking the question, what do you hope to wake up to on Friday the 13th? I will get to a lot of your messages that have been pouring in after the 11 o'clock news. 0344 499 1000 is the number you need to let us know your thoughts. You can speak to myself, James and Sam, who are going to be with me for the next hour before 12 o'clock, where Will Moy, CEO of Full Fact, will join me here in the studio to pick over some of the most dubious claims made by political parties on this final run-up to our general election on Thursday. It's the 11 o'clock news next.
We are Talk Radio. The Alexis Conran Show on Talk Radio with The Times and The Sunday Times. Know your times.
It's time to rake in the dough with eBay. Multiply your moolah and feed that cute little piggy bank you've had sitting on your shelf. List by Monday and you can make more money than ever selling on eBay with a max £1 selling fee per item. It's super simple. So while you're spending the weekend doing fun stuff, your little piggy bank is getting bigger. making money. It's happening on eBay. Activate your offer at ebay.co.uk/promo. Excludes business sellers. T's and C's apply.
Ho, ho, ho. Who's made a list this year? I want a new phone. One with amazing cameras, ultra-wide lens, of course, live focus video. Well, it has to be 5G ready to stream all my films. Can it come with something awesome to listen to them through?
Darling, I think he was talking to the kids.
Get everything you want and more. Purchase a Samsung 5G ready device and claim a pair of silver wireless Galaxy Buds at no extra cost. Shop our 5G handsets in store or online at your local Vodafone store or vodafone.co.uk. 18 plus. Offer excludes Galaxy Fold 5G. Purchased by the 25th of the 12/19. Claim from Samsung within 30 days. T's and C's apply.
Clean teddy bears, afternoon snoozes on the sofa, and weekend box set binges. All made possible by Bright House. Because with up to 30% off APR across appliances, entertainment, technology and our new Argos price match, you can grab a great deal. Bright House, your weekly payment store. Representative APR 69.9%. Argos price match for exact product matches only. Terms apply. Credit available subject to status.
Come on in, everyone! Gavin, Stacey, Mrs. Bryan, Robbie, Your Majesty, Craig, Shirley, Mr. Bond. Oh, hello, Smithy. Lock the fridge, please, love. Have them all round to yours with the Sun's brilliant Christmas TV listings pull-out. Pick up the Sun on Sunday today.
Across the UK, online and on DAB.
Countdown to the election on Talk Radio.
Across the UK, online and on DAB.
Talk Radio, on the hour news headlines.
Good morning, I'm Rob Malarkey. Boris Johnson says leaked Treasury documents used by Labour are wrong and has stressed there'll be no checks on goods travelling between Northern Ireland and Great Britain under his Brexit deal. Jeremy Corbyn claims the report shows voters are being misled, but the Prime Minister has provided this response.
There's no question of there being checks on goods going NIGB or GBNI. We're part of the same customs territory, and it's very clear that there shall be unfettered access.
The Conservatives have reiterated their pledge to introduce a points-based immigration system if they win a majority on Thursday. As the election campaign enters its final few days, Mr Johnson says he'll ensure immigration levels come down. Labour is critical of the plans, saying there'd be no democratic control or accountability. And the Lib Dems are today promising a £50 billion fund for infrastructure investment outside of London. Manchester City have pledged to issue a lifetime ban to anyone found guilty of racist abuse after Manchester United players said they were targeted during Saturday's Premier League match. The City manager Pep Guardiola says club officials are working with Greater Manchester Police in order to help them identify any individuals concerned.
I think the club made a statement, support all of them, so I think the club with the police, with the guys are going to try to discover the reason why, to avoid it not happen again.
There are demands for more support for so-called care leavers who are at risk of falling into debts, unemployment and homelessness. The Children's Society says 78,000 young people were in the system in England at the end of March, 4% higher than the year before. There are concerns about more violent scenes in Paris today as national strikes continue for a fourth day. Yesterday, riot police fired tear gas as the demos against President Macron's planned pension reforms took place. And the world's largest private collection of whiskey will go under the hammer in February. The haul of almost 4,000 bottles is expected to fetch up to £8 million. As for the weather, strong winds are expected to hit the UK today as Storm Atia sweeps in over the course of the afternoon. The Met Office has issued a yellow warning for severe gales for West Wales and the southwest of England.
Talk Radio Sports Update.
The British boxer Anthony Joshua isn't ruling out a third world title fight with Andy Ruiz. Joshua's become the unified world heavyweight champion for a second time following his victory in last night's rematch in Saudi Arabia. The Manchester City manager Pep Guardiola admits it's unrealistic to even think about catching Liverpool and retaining the Premier League title. City find themselves 14 points behind the leaders after their 2-1 derby defeat by Manchester United. And this season's first piece of Scottish silverware is up for grabs this afternoon as Rangers take on Celtic in the League Cup final at Hampden Park. That's the latest.
Talk Radio. Across the UK, online and on DAB Digital Radio.
Talk politics on Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Talk Politics with me, Alexis Conran, here on Talk Radio with the Times. Be well informed. We still have Sam Lister, Deputy Political Editor at the Daily Express with me, and James Meadway, former Labour advisor to John McDonnell. We are asking the question, what do you hope to wake up to next Friday morning? Plenty of you have been contacting our Twitter page, our Facebook page and our YouTube page, where you can still watch us being live streamed. Let's get to some of your messages. Michael says on Facebook, how about being realistic, though, as all these manifesto commitments will never happen. I still have to fill in my postal vote and struggling not to just spoil my ballot paper. My vote and voice counts for nothing. That's sort of disappointing every time you hear that, I think. I understand people's frustrations when they say, I want to spoil my ballot because I'm not being offered any of the choices that I want. I understand that. Politics has become quite fragmented, fractured, and sort of parties are moving away from the centre. Anybody in the centre ground seems to sort of find themselves nowhere to go. And I don't know quite what to say to people who are looking to spoil that ballot paper, because I kind of think, well, again, that's your democratic right, but it seems like such a waste.
Well, it's a similar... I think your earlier caller, Alex, touched on it. There's just so many people who've been sort of battered for so long now that they can't see any real prospect of things getting better. I mean, frankly, I think for Labour, that's a problem. That's like what you're up against. You're saying, look, things could be different. We live in a rich country. Things could be different for you. But if you're looking at, nearly 10 years of austerity on top of 40-odd years in some of these places of a complete lack of investment by successive governments, there's a lot of people thinking, well, nothing can ever get better than this. So why should I vote? Why should I hope for anything? Why should I believe you? And I think there's a real sort of quite a deep-seated feeling like that. Now, the Tories are trying to tap into it. This is where Get Brexit Done is a slogan for them. They want to sort of drag out that kind of negativity and say, look, we can at least do this thing and forget everything else. Don't bother with that.
Well, also their argument being is if once we get Brexit done, then we can
sell off the NHS.
Yeah. No, come on, James. We can think about other things. Sam's in despair. We can think about other things, which is a true statement, I have to say. Labour are saying the same thing. We need to get Brexit out the way before we actually start
what kind
dealing...
of an extraordinary slogan is this? Imagine you going to elect... Step back from it. You're saying, we have to do this thing that's a complete nuisance, get it out of the way, and then we'll do a load of other stuff. What is the other stuff, exactly? Well, the manifesto is a little bit slender on what the other stuff might be.
But maybe,
a couple of bits and bobs,
but maybe it's a perfect strategy because people are not going to be able to take in too many things at the same time. You start with one simple strategy, one simple slogan, one simple message, and it seems to be working. I mean, they are still ahead in the polls. Okay, the gap seems to be closing, opening. Sam, I just want to get your thoughts on, every time we have an election, I keep hearing from friends, and of course, depending on where they live, because of our first past the post system, you do get this whole, well, my vote was wasted anyway because I'm in a safe seat, whether it's a Labour seat, a Conservative seat, a Lib Dem seat. My vote makes no difference. And with a potential further hung parliament, which will be our third in 10 years, do you think that there is still a case for reviewing the first past the post system? I know we had that referendum back in 2011, which was the coalition referendum the Lib Dems forced on the Conservatives. But is it time to start thinking about some sort of PR system where, because that will immediately destroy that argument of my vote doesn't count. Everybody's vote will count in a system where proportional representation is adopted.
Yes, you do get all your votes will count, but the problem you do get with PR is that you don't have a direct link with your own MP. The parties can choose who to put where, and that causes problems. And also it does almost build in the fact it will be coalition government almost permanently. I suppose if you operate on the basis that you're probably always going to be in coalition, then that does alter the way you do your manifestos and what you pitch to voters is. But I think traditionally we prefer as a country to have a clear outcome. Obviously, we haven't had that in the last few years.
But that's what I mean. It's not where our politics is going. And we have to adapt to where our politics are going. And if you're going to have more extreme, the Labour Party shifting more to the left, the Conservative Party shifting more to the right, in a two-party system, that leaves the people who want to sort of stay in the middle, leaves them very little place to go. The Liberal Democrats will have something to say about that, and the Greens, of course.
But I go back to my previous point in the previous hour that actually in 2017, more than 80% of the votes went to Labour and the Conservatives. So actually, when push came to shove, people picked one side.
But that's the key, though, isn't it? Isn't it? Your vote shouldn't be when push comes to shove.
Yeah.
Your vote should be. I mean, if I was a Green MP, I'd be so frustrated because these things online that you can take where they don't give you they ask you questions and they find out which party manifesto most aligns with you, and the Greens are so high up in those things. But of course, they're not one of the two big parties. And as you said, when push comes to shove, someone's going to go, excuse me, why would I vote for the Greens? They have no chance of getting in.
But the problem is, if you are voting under PR and you're going to get a coalition, but you don't know who your party's going to align with. So if you vote for the Greens, well, who are they going to pal up with? Will it be Labour? Will it be the Lib Dems? Will it be both? Will it be the SNP? You need to know.
It's not a perfect system.
You don't actually know what government you're going to get. You might get your party.
But you could say the same about hung parliaments, couldn't you?
Absolutely, yeah.
And I think it'll be interesting if we get another hung parliament here. I think even the most diehard fans of first past the post may have to rethink. Is it a system that works for this country where we are now? Back to some more of your messages. We've got Marcus on Facebook saying he wants to see a Tory landslide and Labour in ruins. Not just defeated, but in ruins. Chris on Twitter, as long as Corbyn, Swinson or anyone from the SNP are nowhere near Downing Street, I'm not bothered. That's the second message we've had about people not wanting the SNP to do any good. Glenn on YouTube says this election will just confirm how badly we need major reforms to our system. There we go. Glenn, you've been listening. First past the post is dead democratically. Glenn, I don't know how you did that, but that you just read on my... Oh, no, hang on. He sent that at 20 past 10. Sorry, Glenn, that was an hour ago. And I didn't get round to reading it. Ian on Twitter says... a Brexit/Leave landslide, and that means a healthy Conservative majority. Now, let's talk about this healthy Conservative majority. It's been, I think the last MRP figures were 64 majority. Now it's been cut down to
30, 38.
30, 38.
Times.
Here's my, not conundrum, but here's my my thinking on the... I think the Conservative majority can really shape this country, and it really, we have lots of permutations of results, and I think the size of a potential Conservative majority can really change the course of this country. Why do I say that? Because if Conservatives end up with a small majority, and what would you call a small majority, 20?
Or less, yeah.
20 or less? Does that qualify as a small majority? Then how much can Boris Johnson really deviate from what he wants to do with his free trade agreement, his Brexit plan? He will be beholden to those 40, 60, however many it is now, members of the ERG. Whereas with a healthier majority of, say, above 40, above 50, he could change tack a little bit and perhaps, go for an extension, give himself enough time to get a free trade agreement that is not... that is as beneficial as possible to this country. Sam, do you think there is a difference in the type of majority that the Conservatives could potentially get?
Of course, when you've got a big majority, you've got ultimate power. You'll get a few rebels, but most parties always have a few rebels, and Jeremy Corbyn was obviously Blair's repeated rebel 500 times, I think, throughout the Labour years of government, but it didn't matter. And this is the point, isn't it? You need a majority to really push through your agenda. If you're into single or double, early double digits, he's going to have much more difficulties on his hands.
Because, as unified as we like to think the Conservative Party is behind Boris Johnson, and they certainly seem to be, and they have the support of the Brexit Party now as it's sort of disintegrated towards the Conservatives, if he does have that slim majority of about 20, there could be trouble ahead, couldn't there, James?
In theory, I mean, I think in practice they've done a fairly sort of methodical job of weeding out candidates who are likely to cause trouble. I mean, some of that is people choosing to exit the scene themselves, and some of it has been fairly tight control over candidate selection. So I think I'm bound to say this, I think under any circumstances a Tory majority of any sort is basically a continuation of the wreckage of the last 9 years, and that's being generous about it, probably an acceleration if you look at the details of the trade deal.
But James, do you think a larger Tory majority, a majority of, above 50, actually perhaps gives you a more moderate government because you can afford to move away from the extremes that perhaps the Spartans or the ERG members or whatever they're calling themselves now are forcing you to go towards. And actually you can, I could see a world where Boris Johnson does do a free trade agreement, which is almost like a soft Brexit, because he's also going to get the support of quite a lot of Labour MPs for that. And, you've got to take into account that we will have left by then. So this whole idea of second referendum, there's still some hope. That will have all been gone. So now it's like, okay, what can we go with that is least damaging? And he's much more likely to be able to deliver a softer Brexit with a larger majority.
I mean, you can argue cases and what may or may not happen, that some of those hypotheticals. I mean, going on a couple of things, really. One, the bare minimum that the Tories have talked about in their manifesto, you have to assume that they'll stick to at least some of that rather than just, deviate rapidly. And it's the reason you write a manifesto. It has a constitutional status. The House of Lords has to agree to things that you pass through Parliament that are in the manifesto, that sort of thing. So your ability to deviate is not great. The other one is, what is the intellectual direction of the Conservative Party at this point in time? Where's the thinking coming from? Who are the people who sat down and thought about, right, what kind of society do you want to live in? And it does come from that group of people who are very, very, Singapore on Thames, deregulate, low taxes. Mm-hmm. These are people who are in the cabinet now. You can think of a few names there. That's where the intellectual direction's coming from. So I think if you have a large majority, and these are the people setting the ideas about where the country needs to go, I think that's where you end up. Put that in with the manifesto, then I think this is where you end up in all circumstances under a Conservative government with a majority.
Now, there was one other thing that this week I just wanted to pick on you, James, on that, but I'm interested to get Sam's thoughts as well. I don't understand, because you used to be the economic advisor to John McDonnell. When people do their sums, do they not get somebody independent to just check them for them?
We've asked for this.
Do you not kind of go to the IFS or to the ONS and go, look, this is what we think. You just have a quick look before we go public. And I asked this specifically to one of the Labour claims. They said under their policies, Labour would save an average family £6,700. Now, Full Fact have looked at that. Everybody looked at that and said this figure is not credible and does not represent what an average family would save. You could avoid all the bad press of saying, oh, there we go again, people making stuff up, by checking it before you release it.
I think we've asked for that. Labour, John, and certainly John McDonnell has asked for this. It would be very good to have something like the Office of Budget Responsibility going through parties' manifestos before they're out. It would be good to have a sort of genuinely independent audit and access to those sorts of facilities.
And is it not happening?
That doesn't happen. No. We've put the request in repeatedly to the Treasury, to the Chancellor of the Exchequer, repeatedly denied. So the government has a sort of built-in advantage in terms of doing costings because you have access to that sort of thing. So that would be an improvement. I mean, I believe something like this happens in the States around the Congressional Budget Office, so it'd be a move towards that kind of system.
But Rebecca Long-Bailey admitted that figure was not what most people were going to receive. She knew when she put those figures out that was misleading the public.
Same with the Tories' £2,000
she knew.
figure.
So regardless of whether they have somebody independent in to check them, she put those figures out knowing it was misleading to the public.
Same with the Tories' £2,000 tax rise.
The 58 billion for WASPy women was put out after the supposed costed
But to be
manifesto.
To be fair to that, you're absolutely right, and it hasn't been costed. But I think Labour are not trying to deceive that it hasn't. I mean, they have been honest and say, I think it was either John McDonnell, I can't remember who it was, but they said we see it as a moral obligation and we will borrow the money. I think they've been open about it.
Exactly, but they didn't put that in the manifesto, did they?
No, because
they didn't say in the manifesto.
No, they did.
Manifesto, they didn't put the figure on it.
It says in the manifesto.
It says there's an aspiration to do
Yeah.
it.
No.
It doesn't say 58 billion in that manifesto. It just doesn't.
The manifesto has a commitment to doing this.
Yeah,
so that's
it doesn't put 58 billion.
No, it doesn't put a figure, but I don't think they've.
So that's misleading the public.
Not
Is it
quite
misleading
as-
to say we're going to borrow 58 million because we see it as a
58
moral...
billion.
Yeah, we're going to borrow 58 billion because we see it as a moral obligation.
But if you put out a costed manifesto, which is 82 billion a year,
yeah,
and then just chuck
You just
on
add.
58 billion
Yeah.
3 days later,
yeah.
how are the public supposed to believe those figures? You're saying to the public, this is how much it's going to cost. Oh, by the way, actually, we're just adding on this. We haven't put it in our manifesto.
John's
and
argument.
then putting out figures about how much average families are going to receive when actually they're not. And Rebecca Long Bailey knew that.
John's argument was that this is a sort of an exceptional one-off payment to correct an injustice, that people are entitled to this money, so we need to find a way to do it.
So why not put it in the
So
manifesto?
well,
You
it
must
is in
have known the
manifesto.
figure.
It is in the manifesto.
The figure is not in the manifesto.
There's a manifesto and a costings document, so we can...
It's not in the costings
But that
document.
58 billion
It's
is
not in the
not in
costings
the grey
document.
book. Can we agree on that?
Yeah, that's right. And the issue with the figure is putting out a bit later is being clear about what you're going to do, which I think is perfectly reasonable.
Why not put it in the manifesto?
It's very odd to say. It's very odd to say that this is a bad thing to be clear with people about what you're going to spend and what you're not. Now, there's estimates on the uncosted. There are estimates about uncosted spending commitments in the Tory manifesto. The figure doing the rounds is 70 billion if you start to stack up. The gigafactory that apparently is going to be built. Where's the 3.4 billion pounds on that? Nowhere to be seen in the manifesto. The costings themselves are all over the place.
Okay.
There is a problem with the Tory party putting out numbers as well throughout the entirety of this campaign.
Well, my question was more general. I've got to move on because we're going to speak to Chris Curtis in a second, a political research manager at YouGov. But as a member of the public, you do start to wonder, and you go, why don't they double check these and hand them to independent fact checkers like Full Fact or the OBR or the ONS and kind of go, not the ONS, but the OBR, and then go, does this stand up before you go to press?
Because
and I think it's
the
both
the figure's circulated around, hasn't it? So
Yeah.
there's £6,700 for ordinary families. That's percolated round before anybody's been able
Labour's
to.
asked repeatedly for access to the Office of Budget Responsibility, its data, its expertise.
But I mean,
it's been denied.
it's almost the same argument that we're having about the 50,000 more nurses, which Prime Minister this morning had to admit it's not. It's only 31,000 of those are new. And that begs the question of why don't you just say, we're going to put 31 new nurses into the system?
Yeah. I think when he announced it, he said it's 50,000 more nurses than we would have, but I think he probably could have done it in a much more clear way.
Sam,
yeah.
I mean,
if he'd have just said 30,000 new nurses
bless you for
plus
trying,
the...
but it's not 50,000 new nurses, and the logic is so flawed, and it makes me wonder, like, whether politicians think of all sides think we're idiots, not just the political community, but just people. I have a 13-year-old daughter. She has 3 apples. If I say I'm going to give you 5 more apples, and then just hand her 2 apples and they go, there you go, you've got 5 more. She's going to laugh at me because she's going to say, Daddy, you've just given me 2 extra. Okay, I mean, it's the same principle to go into studios, to political commenters, to serious people, to be broadcast into the country and say, we're going to put 50,000 more nurses, 19.5 of which are already there, but we're preventing them from leaving. It's just ridiculous. You're much better off going and saying, we're going to hire 30,000 more nurses, new nurses. And then you're
I
done.
agree. I think it would have been better to have pitched it 30,000 new nurses plus we are going to put extra money into retaining these. I think it would have been much simpler and easier.
Well, same with the hospitals. Why talk about 40 hospitals when you don't have the money for 40 hospitals?
Yeah,
It
when
turns
you're
out
just
the
doing
numbers-
6.
Yeah.
I mean,
it's seed funding for 6.
It just seems... It seems ridiculous, but both sides seem to be guilty of that. I've got to go to break because after the break we're going to be speaking to Chris Curtis, political research manager at YouGov. Remember, you can still get in touch with us. 0344 499 1000 is the number you need, or you can tweet us here at Talk Radio.
Talk Radio. Contact Talk Radio. Call 0344 499 1000. Text Talk and your message to 87222. Texts cost 25 pence plus your standard network rate. Or you can tweet us at Talk Radio.
This is Talk Radio.
The Alexis Conran Show on Talk Radio with the Times and the Sunday Times. Know your times.
On 3, our unlimited data is actually unlimited. Like for reals. None of this, we're so unlimited, but nuh-uh, you can't watch your fave Christmas film endlessly, or dead scroll inspo for tree decorations until 4 in the morning. We wouldn't do that to you.
We have no speed limits, no data caps, and you'll be 5G ready at no extra cost.
Ho, ho, ho.
Switch to 3, in-store or online. See 3.co.uk/unlimited-data.
The Honda Jazz, the car that feels fabulously small on the outside, yet deceptively big on the inside. with its incredible storage solutions and magic folding seats. Not to mention the suite of advanced safety features. And now with the small but big Jazz event, it's available with 0% APR representative and 5 years complimentary servicing until January 31st. Visit your local dealer to find out more. Honda dealers are credit brokers, not lenders. Finance provided by Honda Finance Europe, authorised and regulated by the Financial Conduct Authority. Terms and conditions apply.
Only just realised it's your turn to host. At John Lewis & Partners, it's not too late to get your home ready with sofas and sofa beds from £299, still available for delivery by Christmas. Just order your furniture by the 18th of December to make sure it arrives before they do. John Lewis & Partners. For us, it's personal. T's and C's apply. See website for details.
Your online life is slick and on point. Just how you like it. Except your email. That's a right mess. Chaos. The new Yahoo Mail app will sort all of that out. Gmail account, AOL, Outlook, stick them all on there. Looking for something? Boom! There it is. Need that ticket right now? Whoa! It's already there. And you can unsubscribe from the junk in one tap. We've rethought your email and your life just got tidier. Download the Yahoo Mail app now.
Talk Radio Traffic and Travel.
In Hampshire on the M27 eastbound between junction 7 for Hedge End and junction 8 for Burlesdon, there's an accident blocking a lane and causing delays. We've still got delays on the M32 northbound, that's at junction 2 for Eastville in Bristol because of emergency pothole repairs, congestions back to junction 3. The M25 clockwise, there are delays there approaching junction 27 for the M11 where the two outside lanes remain closed for barrier repairs. And in West Yorkshire on the M1 northbound between junction 36 for Wakefield and junction 40, there's a broken down vehicle blocking a lane. I'm Michael Page.
It's almost 2020, but there's still time to get your Christmas catch-ups in at Costa. You could have a laugh with Auntie Sally over delicious gingerbread lattes. Tease gift ideas out of your difficult-to-buy-for sis, while you sip on winter rose flat whites. Or drop some not-so-subtle hints to your boyfriend over Christmassy spiced cappuccinos. Whoever you're catching up with, get together at your local Costa and enjoy all the Christmas coffees you could wish for.
Across the UK, online and on DAB Digital Radio. The Alexis Conran Show on Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Talk Politics with me, Alexis Conran, here on Talk Radio with The Times. Know your times. With me I have Sam Lister, Deputy Political Editor at the Daily Express, and James Meadway, former Labour advisor to John McDonnell. And I'm happy to say that we are joined on the line by Political Research Manager at YouGov, Chris Curtis. Welcome to the show, Chris.
Good morning.
Polls. They're all over the place, aren't they?
I don't think so. I think actually when you look across the polling, they're showing this kind of fairly consistent picture now, which is that over the course of this campaign, both parties have increased their vote share. Conservatives up, Labour up, but they're both up at about the same rate. So what that meant is this sort of fairly comfortable Conservative lead in the polls, around 10 points, let's say, on average, has held throughout the campaign, and that would point towards a Conservative majority. However, of course, a few days of campaigning left, definitely a few days for that gap to close. And also, we've got a few more unknowns this election, most notably tactical voting, which could mean that even a slightly larger Conservative lead in the polls could mean that they still struggle to pick up seats.
So tactical voting, polling can't really take tactical voting into account, is that right?
So these sort of national headline voting intention numbers we're coming out with, the sort of ones you're seeing in the newspapers this morning, they're not doing that. They're just trying to predict the national vote share, so they won't be telling you what's happening in each of the individual constituencies. At YouGov, what we've tried to do to get around that problem is build this, what we call our MRP model, and that does try to look at all of the dynamics that are happening in all of the individual constituencies. It's a big, complicated model we work on. That'll be coming out. Our final one of those will be coming out on Tuesday night, and we'll be able to see if there's any change from the 68 Conservative majority it was pointing to the last time we ran that, for example, through extra taxable voting, or because of the sort of small shifts we've seen in the polls over the past couple of weeks.
Now, we had the leaders' debate on Friday, and I'm pretty sure it was YouGov. You did a snap poll on the leaders' debate straight after it finished on BBC. How dismayed were you that you came up with a number of 52-48?
I mean, yeah, I was somewhat dismayed. We've had two leads, but I think it's quite interesting because, you know, people often say these debates don't move things. I tend to think that they do. I think they're quite important. Lots of people watch them. And quite often you get quite interesting results from them. In 2010, we did these kind of snap polls after the leaders' debates, and it showed that the Liberal Democrats did very well, and they saw a big shift in the polls afterwards. The two leaders' debates this election have basically shown a complete draw, with half the country who prefers Jeremy Corbyn going Jeremy Corbyn and the other half thinking Boris Johnson did best. And, you know, it's a bit annoying to not have an interesting result, but I think what it shows is that we basically have two leaders who the public have mostly made up their minds about. They've been around in politics for a long time. People have already got to know them, and actually it is harder for them to change the public's view of them than it has been in the past.
Does the polling give us a number, not a number, but a rough estimate of those don't knows? I mean, we always talk about elections are really decided about over the don't knows, the undecideds. Do we know roughly how many people find themselves in the situation on a Sunday morning, 3 days before general election, where they haven't actually quite made up their mind of which way they're going to vote?
Yeah, so, I mean, we do have a raw number. I can't actually remember it off the top of my head, but we do have a raw number for don't knows. I believe it's sitting somewhere around 15%. It's a little bit of a misleading number, though, because those who say don't know in the last week of a campaign are also significantly less likely to vote. So we don't have a good indication of how many people there are who say don't know at the moment, but are probably going to vote on Thursday. I'd say possibly the most interesting thing to look at is not necessarily how many don't knows they are, but who the don't knows are, because that might start to give us some indication of where these voters will move back to.
Okay,
and
Jane, finish your sentence.
I was just going to say that they're disproportionately women and they're disproportionately Labour Leave voters, and I think there'll be two particularly interesting groups to watch out for as those that they make up their mind this week.
Question from James Meadway.
Just a quick thing, Chris. If you've got any sort of predictions might be too strong a word, but any thoughts about likely turnout and what you might be picking up on that and the kind of assumptions you're making?
Polling's pretty bad at turnout, but what we have seen in previous elections is that elections that are perceived as being close tend to see high levels of turnout, and elections where there's perceived to be a big difference between the main two parties tend to see a big turnout. So because of that, I'd kind of expect there to be reasonably high turnout this time round, despite the weather. Again, it's a guess. It's kind of speculation, but possibly somewhere around 70%.
Sam Lester from the Daily Express.
Yeah, I was just wondering, are those Labour Leave voters who are undecided, have you got any kind of idea of which way they might jump in the end?
So, I mean, again, we're speculating. I think there's a fair argument that often if voters are undecided at this stage in the campaign, they're probably either going to not vote or go back to their sort of historic voting patterns. If the Tories haven't won them over yet, they're going to struggle to win them over in the final few days. So I'd expect them either not to turn out or to go back to Labour. But of course, it will depend on the sort of closing arguments that the parties put out in this final week, and the Tories know that these are the key voters, so they're going to be really trying to put out an argument to win them over with this sort of get Brexit done messaging.
Chris, is there another... when's the latest polling that we're going to see before the election from YouGov?
Our final poll will be out. It will be out this MRP model, which will give us you national voting intention numbers and also run our model in all of the constituencies. That will be out at 10 o'clock on Tuesday night.
Wow. OK, Chris, plenty to look forward to. Thank you very much for joining us. That's Chris Curtis there, Political Research Manager at YouGov. Now, I'm delighted to say that joining us on the line, a Conservative candidate for Bournemouth East is Tobias Elwood. Welcome back to the show.
Good morning.
Good morning. Great to have you on. You were listening in there to the polling that has been going on. How much does the polling make a difference in how you are running your campaign on the ground in Bournemouth East?
Well, I'll let you into a secret. Every single candidate from all the parties are actually looking and poring over the details, looking for some good news. But ultimately, it's all got to be taken with a pinch of salt. They are a snapshot at that moment. They are an indication of a sample size. And let's not forget, the 2015 election threw up a surprise against the polling predictions, 2017 as well. Even the EU elections, the polls have got it wrong. I think what we can all agree is that there's some hotspots across the country. There's between 50 and 100 seats where there's a lot of activity. They're the ones to watch. There's some micro battles that are taking place. But what I'm picking up at the moment is a simple binary choice, is the offering of Jeremy Corbyn, which really is such a seismic difference from whatever we've seen from the Labour Party since the Second World War, moving back to a sort of socialist model, versus a Conservative intention to continue forward. And the likelihood is that you're going to get a potential majority parliament with the Conservatives, or there's going to be some form of coalition between the SNP, Labour and the Liberal Democrats, which raises all sorts of difficult questions as to whether that will lead to a second referendum in Scotland or indeed further discussion and debate prolonging Brexit. So it's a very interesting, very difficult election to predict.
We had a caller earlier on, and I appreciate you won't have heard him, but Alex called us in the first hour, who was talking about the difficulties that a lot of people have faced in this country as a result of austerity. We've also discussed on the show, just in the first hour, there's 120,000 deaths that have been linked with austerity. Of course, the links can be a little bit of tenuous, but it's fair to say that we have seen a lot of people suffer under the hands of austerity. We've had 820,000 food parcels in the last 6 months, a 25% increase in the same quarter, the last quarter of the year since last year. People are struggling. And my question is, what are the Conservatives offering in this manifesto to help change that predicament that a lot of people find themselves in? We are the 5th largest economy in the world, and yet we have 4 million children in poverty. Now, you can argue about the figures, whether it's relative poverty or not, but I would think even one child in poverty is one too many. And when one looks at the Conservative Party manifesto that was put together, I think, under the unofficial tagline of "If in doubt, leave it out," it's very focused on the Brexit issue, but a little light on the other detail that will see people's lives improved.
You make some very important points, and it would be foolish not to say that over the last 10 years or so, life has certainly been very, very difficult. Ultimately, we came in when there was no money. There was even a note by the Labour government to remind us when they were departing there was no money to spend. Very tough choices had to be taken right across the board, and it has been frustrating not seeing investments in areas that we want to see. Not only that, we've had to see cuts as well. Let's not dodge this. Let's take police numbers, for example. We're increasing police numbers now, absolutely right, but we're increasing them back to where they were before.
And also,
ultimately, there's a fundamental decision as to how you manage the economy. If you don't have the money to pay for the departments, to pay for the support, the country gets indebted even further, and then there's inflation, then there's further unemployment. More people are then driven towards poverty. What we're now seeing from all parties, in fact, is a recognition that there is now fiscal headroom. There's now the economy is growing fast enough. We've managed to get the actual deficit under control from 150 billion when we came in every year down to 30 billion. It's down to a responsible place where we can actually start spending far more on public services, and that will improve the lives and actually deal with these issues. It's important that we recognise, discussions on food banks, reminding ourselves that actually it has been a very difficult number of years, and there are many people in Britain that absolutely need help.
But you are going to need money to pay for these 20,000 police officers. As a reminder, I think you've cut 21,000 police officers. Now you're restoring 20. And also, no one is talking, and I only raise this because I speak to so many policemen on this show, but no one's talking about the 18,000 police staff that have been cut. And of course, that has a huge effect on those police numbers being able to do their job. But your Chancellor has said that there is a guarantee, and in your manifesto, there's no raise of income tax, VAT or national insurance, but you've also guaranteed that triple lock on pensions. And with inflation rising in the future, how are you going to pay for that rise to pension costs without raising taxes? I mean, you're saying we're going to pay for all this stuff, and you're saying you're not going to raise taxes because you want to differentiate yourselves from the Labour Party. Does this add up, basically, is my question?
Well, firstly, there's a recognition that we will be borrowing more. We will be borrowing is to do with the percentage of the deficit ratio to do with the GDP of the country. And in simple terms, what you don't ever want to do is borrow more than what you're worth. And indeed, if you want the entry requirements, for example, for joining the EU, is you cannot have a deficit ratio of more than 3%. Ours is down to 1.5%. As I say, that's the fiscal headroom, if you like, that allows us to borrow more, to invest in these public services. At the same time, our economy is growing. It's growing faster than Germany, faster than Japan, and that is a good thing. But if the economy starts to slow down, if inflation, as you touched on, starts to creep up, if employment, which is at record levels, starts to actually change, then our country then becomes in a very dangerous position. And that's what we need to avoid. What we're seeing from the Labour side is a massive deluge of spending. So the ability that we cannot pay. In the same way, we'll be repeating the same mistakes that we saw, not just in the 70s and 80s when socialism was at its right, but also when we actually came into power in 2010. We cannot repeat those mistakes. So yes, we are wanting to spend more, but doing it in a responsible manner.
You mentioned there that we have a record low unemployment, which is a wonderful thing. I think we also need to mention that we also have record numbers of in-work poverty. But the Prime Minister was on this morning on Sky saying that he wants to commit himself to lowering immigration in this country. Just a very simple question for someone who doesn't quite understand how these things work precisely. But if we have a record number of people in jobs already, so everybody that can work pretty much in this country is working. We also have huge gaps in our in employment. We have a tremendous amount of vacancies in the construction area, in the NHS. We're going to need to bring in more people. So saying that you're going to reduce immigration, how on earth is that going to solve the problem that we have with vacancies in this country?
Well, let's split that into two. Firstly is who actually comes into this country and are they offering the skill sets that we need, which is why we move over copying the Australian model, which actually looks at those skills that we're needing. You're absolutely right. There are some areas where we need those skill sets to fill the gaps indeed. Nursing is one area as well. But many would argue, why aren't we actually educating people to fill those gaps ourselves? And that's where
because it costs money and it takes time, and you need those vacancies filled now.
Absolutely, and that's why we're seeing a 14 billion boost in the schools budget. We're actually focusing on colleges and education and universities as well, getting them, encouraging them to actually have those courses, have the necessary skill sets, so we can make sure we are able to provide fill those gaps for the areas that we need to provide work for. But it's a duality. It's those who are coming in, making sure that we target those, but at the same time recognizing that we are a small island. We cannot keep growing in the same size as we have been in the past. Obviously it would affect the pressures on services and so forth, but we also need to grow it in a responsible way.
OK, last question from me before... I know James has got one more question, then we'll let you get on with your Sunday afternoon, Mr Elwood, I promise. In page 48, I believe, of the Tory manifesto, there is a paragraph that quite a lot of people have been focusing on recently because it's slightly ambiguous, but can tend to sound quite sinister. I'm just going to read it out. After Brexit, we also need to look at the broader aspects of our constitution, the relationship between government, Parliament and the courts, the functioning of the royal prerogative and the role of the House of Lords. Could you enlighten us as to what that potentially means? Some people take it to mean the shifting away from the legal framework. And it's fair to remind people that this government has had its wrist slapped when it came to the prorogation of Parliament, for example, by the Supreme Court. So is the Tory manifesto on page 48 suggesting a move away from legal framework to a more political framework where the executive can go unchecked?
Well, firstly, any changes that come through will be subject to consultation and then go through the normal parameters of checks as legislation would go. But what you saw, and you touched on such an important point, is it right that we get into this situation whereby the Supreme Court is having to make judgments on the executive and the legislative, the relationship between those two bodies? That is not right. Is it time that we had a written constitution? I don't know the answer to that. That is something that will be...
So, hang on, you're saying it's not right that the Supreme Court upheld the law and held the government to account?
What I'm saying is that before it even goes there, it shouldn't be taken.
Right.
It should be so clear-cut that it shouldn't need the Supreme Court...
I see, so remove the ambiguity.
Absolutely right, because it's an unwritten constitution that we have in this country. We've done well over the last 1,000 years since the Magna Carta. It has expanded and reformed and grown, without the revolutions that we've seen in other countries. But it's getting complicated, and we need to perhaps ensure that we move forward with clearer guidance as to where we are. So it's providing that clarity, so we avoid the necessity for anybody feeling the need to lean on the Supreme Court to make a judgment or interpretation on what the law actually is.
Okay, one question from James Meadway.
A quick one, really, which is and hi to us. It's a quick one about why have you decided a 3% deficit to GDP ratio, if I've heard you right, is the right level? Given that we're 1.5% now, we went through 3% some time ago. Doesn't it rather imply that the last sort of few months of austerity were completely wasted if this is a safe level? So how did you find 3% out of all the numbers you could have picked?
Not at all. If we hadn't had that period of austerity, if we hadn't actually been responsible with the nation's finances, then we wouldn't have got these numbers down to allow us to borrow.
It sounds like you did too much. If you're down at 1.5%, but you think 3% is a safe level, it sounds like you've done too much austerity.
It's not a safe level. I wouldn't say that at all. But it is a level that can be managed for the moment, bearing in mind that there is huge demands and pressures, absolutely right, from the nation to say we need further investment in our health service, further investment in our education, and in policing as well. It's not just police numbers, but what police actually do. Cybercrime, for example, modern slavery. There's aspects to modern policing which weren't there 15, 20 years ago. We're all living longer as well. We're finding cleverer ways to keep ourselves, alive with medicines and so forth. This costs money, but it also requires the government then to provide it and pay for it as well. So I think you're right to question this as why this 3% level is there. It is seen from an economic perspective as a standard that nations above 3% are seen to not manage their finances well.
Who sees this?
Sorry?
Where's your evidence?
It's not the evidence. It's what the economic basis is. The EU, as I've mentioned before, uses the 3% benchmark.
It's 3.5%, isn't it?
Well, I stand corrected as far as the last time.
So why are you now saying it's 3%?
It's 3% because when Greece actually breached that, there was questions as to why it was at that level.
But sorry, but I was going to chuck in one more in this thing because I'm quite intrigued by it. What is 3%?
I'm going to have to let Tobias Selwood go. Tobias Selwood.
It's on me. I need to go and buy a Christmas tree. So.
But before you go, can I just say thank you as an interviewer? It was wonderful to interview a Conservative Party candidate without getting the phrase "Get Brexit Done" anywhere in your interview. So may I thank you for that, and happy Christmas. Can
I just add to that? Because I think when we look back at this, the whole aspect of the interview, of holding people like myself and indeed the leaders to account, will come under scrutiny again. And there are no rules in the digital framework of democracy. They've not been written yet. We're still trying to work out what the actual balance is. The Andrew Marr interview I thought was quite undignified. I thought the Friday night one was actually very, very good. I think because of the way democracy is advancing, the pace of change of information and so forth, lots of questions to be asked. Important that we're held to account as well. But it has been a very different election, apart from the winter election. You touched on it before. But it has been a very different election. I think there's lots of questions to be asked to improve it. We are an exemplar, I think, around the world as to how democracy moves forward. But I think it has been an interesting election, much to learn in the aftermath of the 12th of December.
Well, let's see what happens. Tobias Selwood, thank you very, very much for your time. Important to say that Tobias Selwood is standing in Bournemouth East. Independent, also standing are Independent Ben Aston, Labour Corey Drew, Liberal Democrat Philip Dunn, Independent Emma Victoria Johnson, and the Green Party represented by Alistair Keddy. And we're going to take a very quick break and then we'll be back for the last part of the show.
Countdown to the general election on Talk Radio.
The spin, the soapboxing, the swing.
Your election station. Talk Radio. The Alexis Conran Show on Talk Radio. With the Times and the Sunday Times. Know your times.
This week at Tesco, buy 2 items from our chilled party food range, like tempura prawns or mozzarella sticks, and get a third one free.
So for every 2 people you invite, you can ask another for free. But who? Linda from Accounts or Julio from Magaluf 2010?
Tesco, delivering Christmas for 100 years. Cheapest item free, selected stores while stocks last, ends 1st of January.
Charlie, no! Take that out of your mouth!
You okay, Claire?
I feel rubbish.
Here, have a Lemsip Max all in one.
When cold and flu hits, don't just feel better, feel Lemsip better. Contains paracetamol. Always read the label for ages 16 and above.
Today, it's Aston Villa v Leicester and Brighton v Wolves in a cracking double-header. And with Now TV, you can watch both games live for a one-off payment of just $9.99. Hold on, they're checking with VAR.
That's confirmed. It's $9.99.
Good call. Game on. So, to only pay for the games that matter to you, grab a Now TV Sky Sports Day Pass. Search Now TV Sports. 18 plus, content streamed via internet. Full terms apply.
Hello, I'm Jo Brand. When I see people homeless over Christmas, I find it really upsetting. Whether they're sleeping in doorways, on buses or in hostels, it just shouldn't be happening. But it doesn't have to be like this. This Christmas, crisis centres across Britain are providing warmth and safety, plus long-term support to find people a job and a home. Please reserve a place for someone at Crisis this Christmas for just £28.87. Go to crisis.org.uk now. Thank you.
Talk Radio Traffic and Travel.
There are delays on the M25 clockwise approaching junction 27 for the M11 because of the ongoing barrier repairs. 2 lanes remain closed and the delays are back to junction 26. In Hertfordshire on the M25 clockwise after junction 24 for Potter's Bar there's a broken down vehicle blocking a lane, and in Greater Manchester the M60 anti-clockwise the entry slip road remains closed at junction 19. The Heaton Park 3 Arrows roundabout because of flooding. And just a reminder, the South Western Railway have strike action today, so there's a reduced service across their network. I'm Michael Page.
It's almost 2020, but there's still time to get your Christmas catch-ups in at Costa. You could have a laugh with Auntie Sally over delicious gingerbread lattes. Tease gift ideas out of your difficult-to-buy-for sis, while you sip on winter roast flat whites. Or drop some not-so-subtle hints to your boyfriend over Christmassy spiced cappuccinos. Whoever you're catching up with, get together at your local Costa and enjoy all the Christmas coffees you could wish for.
Across the UK, online and on DAB, the Independent Republic of Mike Graham on Talk Radio.
Blasted rhetoric from the Banana Republic.
Join me, the Reverend Mike Graham. Revolutionary, rebellious, rebuilt, rebranded.
Dangerous mid-morning debate with the great dictator.
The Independent Republic of Mike Graham.
Tomorrow morning from 10.
On Talk Radio. Across the UK, online and on DAB Digital Radio. The Alexis Conran Show on Talk Radio.
Welcome back to the last part of the show with me, Alexis Conran, here on Talk Radio with the Times. Know Your Times. With me, I have Deputy Political Editor Sam Lister and James Meadway, former Labour advisor to John McDonnell. After the 12 o'clock news, we will be joined in the studio by Will Moy from Full Fact, who's going to be bringing us the latest fact-checking news that Full Fact have been looking into. I know that we've been looking into the leaders' debate and some of the latest claims by every party that have been put forward this week to try and win over people's votes. Before I release you two into the wild, you're allowed to go back into your Sundays. Are you expecting to see anything big in the next 3 days, James?
I would have thought both parties at this point might be hoping not to see anything big. I mean,
right.
the silent Nigel Farage might make a reappearance. I think that's one possibility in some form, and urge a vote of some form or another. That might be one thing that pops up, but I wouldn't expect to see anything big. I think this is like the final stretch of getting out and knocking on doors if you're Labour and pumping out Facebook adverts if you're the Tories, I suppose.
Mm-hmm. Sam?
Yeah, I think James is right. It will be pretty much the same, more of the same. I think we can expect a little campaign blitz from the Prime Minister. I'm sure Jeremy Corbyn will be doing the same, but the messages will be the same.
And do you think, I was going to say, do you think that campaign blitz, as you put it, do you think it's going to be a sort of a positive campaign, as in, look, whether it's 40 more hospitals or we're going to add another 40, make it 80. One of those sort of offerings of sort of, as I call it, throwing the kitchen sink. It's. I think there was a headline. It wasn't from the Express. I think it was from the Telegraph. But there was a headline. I was trying to see if I can find it. But it had something to do with the day after Brexit Day. There's going to be some sort of tax cut, sort of a giveaway. Do you think we're going to see more of that, or are we going to basically see the side that I really don't like, the nasty side of, I don't know, Jeremy Corbyn's got spy chihuahuas that have been, hounding the Prime Minister. What's the dog called? Alfie. Alfie, the Prime Minister's dog is being bullied by...
Dylan.
Yeah. Is it going to be the negative stuff, which...
I would imagine that
unsavoury.
the PM will go out there with quite an upbeat stump speech with his vision, and he's set out his 100 100 days, first 100 days earlier this week, which would be the
it's a very American
Brexit
thing,
budget.
that, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. But with the Brexit budget a few days after Brexit Day, where the tax cuts are introduced and other kind of measures. So yeah, I think that's what you will see from him.
It was the Daily Telegraph. You're off the hook, Sam. Yeah, fine. Tax cuts for millions within days of Brexit.
Yeah.
It just sort of feels like a bit almost like I know we've had this argument, so I don't want to have it again, but the WASPy women and the sort of 58 billion, yeah, it's fine, we'll find it, we'll borrow it. But it sort of seems that we're all having that sort of and another thing, we're going to throw this out your way, but I have to say I'd rather that than the negative stuff.
To be fair, it is a manifesto promise to change the threshold of national insurance, which will give people extra money in their pockets. So it wasn't a new announcement; it was a repackaging of what's in the manifesto.
But I remember again, and Will Moy will clear that up for us. But I think we've already covered it. That this savings, there was again the earlier conversation we had of, if you're going to announce a saving, get someone to sort of check it over. Don't have your fantasy figure. I think people were mentioning up to £500 per person, but actually that turned out to be 70.
Once you take account of the interaction with benefits, people on universal credit, lots of people not paying national insurance contributions already. So the actual figure people get tends to vary a little bit from that. I mean, I'm sure Boris Johnson will try and present something positive out of this. I suspect Labour might also be doing something around, what are we going to do in government? Here's our plan, sort of thing. Mm-hmm. But the bit we don't see, I think, is where it's going to go negative, and that is the kind of Facebook advertising. Mm-hmm. There was a report in the Times last week from the inevitable Conservative sources saying we've held back all this money to spend in the last few days. So I think there's going to be an extremely unpleasant online advertising campaign from the Conservatives in particular.
And again, a reminder here, but I mean, you're always in a precarious position as doing this job, as having to be fair and balanced. And I am trying my bestest to be fair and balanced, but I'm only reporting what people who are looking at the facts are saying. And from Full Fact as well, nearly 90% of Conservatives' recent Facebook ads promote claims labelled as misleading by Full Fact, one of the platform's own third-party fact-checking parties in the UK. That is another story. So yes, but I mean, it definitely feels to me that all the lessons that were learnt from the referendum and the advertising campaigns that went on, the claims that made their way through Facebook and all the social media, we seem to have known about that. We also knew that there was likely going to be, we had one election in 2017. We knew there was likely going to be another election, but nothing seems to have been done to tighten those rules, close those loopholes. It seems like we're running an election on the same rules that we've have evidence that the past elections were compromised. Now, to what extent they were compromised, we don't know. We haven't seen that Russian interference paper, but it seems crazy to me that we haven't changed the rules when we know that they were not watertight last time. I mean, it seems like.
Well, this is digital campaigning, and the rules are analogue and quite strictly analogue about how you're supposed to spend and what you're supposed to spend. But they've adapted a bit. I mean,
but I think a lot of people are not. And again, this was one of the sort of big revelations that Will, who's going to be joining me in the studio after the 12 o'clock news, a political advertising is not subject to any fact checking, which is stunning, I think, to most people, and I think most people are unaware of that. I think most people are unaware that you can pay an extraordinary amount of money to a social media team. And if you're the Labour Party, just print anything you want, or the Conservatives, or the Liberal Democrats, or the Greens, and they are under no obligation to say, well, you can't print that. That's factually incorrect. And I think I only discovered that because I was covering a story where the Advertising Standards Agency had to pull some adverts from the DWP, which were dispelling myths about universal credit. And the Advertising Standards Agency said to them, you can't print that but that was because it was an advert, not political advertising. Yeah. Had the Conservatives released exactly the same posters, exactly the same imaging, but didn't put it in a newspaper as an advert, they would have been allowed to print it. And that, to me, seems broken.
I don't think we've, as a country, have yet come to terms with the impact social media has on election campaigning.
But that feels like, I mean, come on. It's not as if social media just appeared yesterday.
But there's very strange techniques, the way parties try and flood Twitter to try and bury bad stories, and there's I won't use the term, but there's a way of getting taking Twitter over with bad posting to make it go viral. And it seems counterintuitive, but by posting something that's looks on the surface quite bad for the party, because it gets retweeted so many times, it gets the message out there accidentally.
Is this the deceased pet? The
squirrels.
Things like that. But also, if the Conservatives put out a deliberately bad video, then Labour people start mocking it, and actually the Labour people are doing the Conservatives' job by retweeting it, even though it's a bad video.
Let me. We've run all out of time, and I've been urged to bring this to this close, but I can't resist by putting both of you on the spot for a little prediction.
Please don't.
It's not what you would like to see, but what you think is likely to happen based on what the evidence that we have before us.
God, well, the evidence we have before us, as all the pollsters and everybody's saying, is like it's really, really wide open. This is Data Praxis this morning saying that it's going to depend a great deal on the campaign. I think Labour has a very, very good on-the-ground campaigning operation. I think that's swinging into operation throughout all of this election. If that works over the next few days, then we're certainly into hung parliament territory.
Sam?
I think there's quite a big chance of being back in hung parliament territory, but there could be a small Tory majority.
Okay. It will all be known this time next week on Talk Politics next Sunday. Thank you both. I really appreciate your time, and thank you for your contributions. Sam Lester, Deputy Political Editor at the Daily Express, and James Meadway, former Labour advisor to John McDonnell. Thank you very much for your time. It's the 12 o'clock news next. Will Moy will join me in the studio from Full Fact. He's going to be with me for an hour. This is your chance to call in. 0344 499 1000 is the number you need if you've got any questions on information that you've read, you want it fact-checked. Remember, if it's information and facts that you agree with, those are the ones you really want to fact-check. So give us a call here, or you could tweet your questions at Talk Radio, and you can watch us continue to be live stream on our YouTube channel. It's the 12 o'clock news next.
We are
Talk Radio.
The Alexis Conran Show on Talk Radio with The Times and The Sunday Times. Know your times.
Clean teddy bears, afternoon snoozes on the sofa, and weekend box set binges. All made possible by Bright House. Because with up to 30% off APR across appliances, entertainment, technology, and our new Argos price match, you can grab a great deal. Bright House, your weekly payment store. Representative APR 69.9%. Argos price match for exact product matches only. Terms apply. Credit available subject to status.
Mate, this fan's suspension is rubbish.
Tell me about it.
Even the radio's had it.
I know, but I'd get nothing if I scrapped it.
Actually, you can get at least £2,000 off a new Ford for it.
You're kidding?
With Ford's new for old scrappage scheme, you can get between £2,000 and £6,250 off a new Ford van if you scrap an eligible vehicle with us responsibly. Also, there's 0% APR representative on Ford Acquire. Ford Commercial Vehicles. Backbone of Britain. Search Ford Scrappage. Exclusions apply. Contract and register by 31st of December 2019 at participating dealers. Agent ownership criteria apply to scrappage vehicle. Subject to status. Free post full credit. Deposit restrictions apply.
Emma, this is for you. Thanks, Mum. It's got a fabulous set of cameras. Ultra-wide lens and everything.
Jan.
And this is for you, Jack.
Thanks, Mum.
It tracks your heartbeat. Isn't that clever?
Jan, honestly.
I love these are for you.
Oh, thanks.
They're supposed to have amazing base quality.
Mum!
Enjoy cashback on our Samsung Galaxy range, including £100 when you purchase the Galaxy S10e. Shop from our Galaxy range at your local Carphone Warehouse store or carphonewarehouse.com. Purchased by the 25th of December 2019. Came from Samsung within 30 days of purchase. T's and C's apply.
Across the UK, online and on DAB.
As the nation gets ready to go to the polls, don't miss Talk Radio's dedicated election coverage. Countdown to the general election on Talk Radio.
Across the UK, online and on DAB.
Talk Radio, on the hour news headlines.
Good afternoon, I'm Rob Malarkey. Boris Johnson says leaked Treasury documents used by Labour are wrong and has stressed that there'll be no checks on goods travelling into Great Britain from Northern Ireland under his Brexit deal. But the Prime Minister's admitted there will be checks on some goods moving in the opposite direction. Mr Johnson's also given a strong guarantee to bring immigration levels down under a points-based system if he wins a majority on Thursday.
You've seen quite a large number of people coming in from the whole of the EU, able to treat the UK as though it's basically part of their own country. The problem with that is there's been no control at all, and I don't think that that is democratically accountable.
Labour's critical of the plans. They say there'd been no democratic control or accountability. And the Lib Dem leader Jo Swinton's hinted she'd back a different Labour leader in the event of a hung parliament.
There's clearly lots of people within the Labour Party who I do work well with and have worked well with. In the last 3.5 years, we have been working on a cross-party basis to try to secure a people's vote. And that kind of cooperation will absolutely continue.
A man has been arrested in connection with allegations of racist abuse at last night's Premier League match between Manchester City and Manchester United. City have pledged to issue a lifetime ban to anyone found guilty after United players said they were targeted. A King's College student who was knifed to death in London while returning home from a restaurant was entirely blameless, police have said. Mohammed Abdullah Al-Araimi, who was 20, was stabbed in Knightsbridge in the early hours of Friday. And there are concerns about more violent scenes in Paris as national strikes continue for a fourth day. Yesterday, riot police fired tear gas as the demos against President Macron's planned pension reforms took place. As for the weather, strong winds are expected to hit the UK this afternoon as Storm Atia sweeps in over the course of the day. The Met Office has issued a yellow warning for severe gales for the west of Wales and the southwest of England.
Talk Radio Sports Update.
The British boxer Anthony Joshua isn't ruling out a third world title fight with Andy Ruiz. Joshua's become the unified world heavyweight champion for a second time following his victory in last night's rematch in Saudi Arabia. The Manchester City manager Pep Guardiola admits it's unrealistic to even think about catching Liverpool and retaining the Premier League title. City find themselves 14 points behind the leaders after their 2-1 derby defeat by Manchester United. And this season's first piece of Scottish silverware is up for grabs this afternoon as Rangers take on Celtic in the League Cup final at Hampden Park. That's the latest.
Talk Radio. Across the UK, online and on DAB Digital Radio.
Talk Politics with Alexis Conran on Talk Radio.
Welcome back to the show with me, Alexis Conran, here on Talk Radio with the Times. Know your times. Now, I'm glad to say that, the third or fourth week in a row, I'm joined in the studio by Will Moy, CEO of fullfact.org, the charity fact-checking service that, seem to be very, very, very busy at this time of year, election year and election campaign. Will's going to be here with me for the rest of the show until 1 o'clock, after which Jamie East will take over. And Jamie will be in the studio to tell us what's coming up. This is your chance to give us a call and ask your questions. If there's a claim that you've seen, if you want it fact-check, Will's here. He's got his laptop. He's got a whole team of people back in the office who I think are busy enjoying their Sundays, but are willing to lend us a hand?
I'm not sure if watching all the political TV shows on a Sunday morning counts as enjoying your Sundays, but I'd like to thank Abbas and Joel, who are on the other end of our fact-checking service today.
Thank you, Abbas and Joel, from me as well, and I'm sure from the listeners as well. So tweet us your question at Talk Radio. You can text it, text the word talk to 87222, followed by your message, or better yet, pick up the phone 0344 499 1000 and ask your question. Of course, there is a caveat. If your question is going to be particularly challenging, you're going to have to give Will a bit of a chance to actually come back with some verified facts. Don't expect an immediate answer straight away, but we will do our best. And so far, we have been very successful on this show at impromptu questions, so don't give up on us. I just want to get, before we start with Will, because I know he's got plenty to talk to us about, we've been asking the question, what do you hope to wake up to next Friday? And it'd be remiss of me to not read quite a few of your messages here. So I'm just going to go through them. Anthony on Facebook says, Tory minority Labour gains. Aidan on Twitter said, a plan for leaving the EU. Anonymous on YouTube said, I would dearly love Farage as Prime Minister, but that ain't going to happen, so it's got to be Boris. I was going to say, when I read that first part, thinking, have you not been paying attention? Chaos Flower on YouTube says, a Labour government. I see homeless people in places I never saw before, and tents along the canal outside the coffee shop in my village. Interesting that it's in a village there. You tend to associate seeing homeless people more in the big cities, but I guess maybe that's a clue as to how big the problem is. Martin on Facebook says, a Tory majority, please, then resignations of the Labour front bench, and let the party start to move back to the centre and reconnect with the working class. Interesting, because, of course, we've been talking about that red wall up in the Midlands, those Labour heartlands, the working class being in danger of switching to the Conservatives. And interesting that Martin on Facebook thinks that if the Labour Party moved back to the centre, they would reconnect with the working class. I wish you'd called in, Martin, and we could have had that chat. Will, let's start our fact-checking session, shall we? Where do you want to start? I'll let you pick the first one.
Well, let's start with what we expected to see on Friday. And actually, let me start with a small correction because I'm a good fact checker. My colleagues today are Joe and Abbas, not Joel and Abbas. Apologies, Joe. But let's start with what we should have expected to see on Friday night when Jeremy Corbyn and Boris Johnson got up on TV for their last head-to-head debate. The Institute for Fiscal Studies, who are the experts on the budget, have said of their manifestos, neither Labour nor the Conservatives is being honest with the electorate. Neither is a properly credible prospectus for what they'll do, on how they'll tax us and what they'll spend their money on. The UK and a Changing Europe, who are the experts in Brexit, have basically said that both of them have got some vague slogans for the directions to go in, but are massively vague about what happens next. So in the Conservatives' case, we don't know what kind of security cooperation they want with the rest of Europe, which is a massively important question. In Labour's case, of course, we know very little about the deal that they want to negotiate after the election. So these two debaters came in on Friday night asking for a blank cheque, and they left still asking for a blank cheque. And what we saw through most of that debate was repeats of the slogans we've heard through the campaign. And it's really important to remember before we start talking about exactly what's happening with free ports or exactly what's happening with the number of nurses in the NHS. The big picture here is we don't really know what these guys would do if they got into government.
It seems... Can I question that?
Yeah.
Because it seems to me that you could... The Conservative Party, we were talking earlier with Lester, the Conservative Party have taken, we heard the motto, which, if in doubt, leave it out. Probably a wise decision of keeping the manifesto as simple as possible. They are focused on that one issue, which is the Get Brexit Done issue. Remarkably, I had a Conservative candidate on, Tobias Elwood, who didn't use the phrase Get Brexit Done in the entire interview, which actually stumped me. And the other party, Labour, and of course the Lib Dems and the Greens and SNP, have had a little bit more bones on what they would do, a little bit more detail of what they would do and what they would spend if they got into government. So is it fair to accuse both with the same... I mean, I know the IFS have said neither are credible because of the way they've planned to pay for everything. But is it fair to say that both are asking essentially for a blank cheque?
Yeah, because okay, so let's separate those things out. Yes, the reason I would say they are asking for a blank cheque is we don't know what they will do when they get into power. The manifestos are not telling us what will happen with Brexit. They're not.
This is specifically to Brexit,
or for tax and spend.
Right.
They're not realistically telling us how much will be taxed and where that money will go. Now, Labour have set out in quite a lot of detail what money they want to raise and where they want to raise it from.
But why is that considered unrealistic?
Because the Institute for Fiscal Studies, so again, they're the people who crunch the numbers on this, have looked at the total amount they want to spend. Labour are promising that the top 5% of people will not pay more in income tax, national insurance, or VAT. But there is no country that raises the kind of amounts of money that Labour want to raise without the cost falling on taxpayers generally and not just the top 5%.
Yeah, so they've said the top 5% are the ones who are going to pay for that, essentially. But they're also
they're effectively exaggerating what the top 5% can pay for. Realistically, to do what they want to do, they're going to have to put taxes up in other places too. Worth saying, by the way, what they want to do is not totally out there. So we're not talking about a bigger state than Germany, for example.
It will put us in line with France,
but they're not unheard of in terms of the scale of.
But things like saying that they were going to increase the corporation tax, does that also not count as bringing in revenue?
Yeah, so corporation tax is one of the big ways Labour wants to raise money. The thing about corporation tax is somebody ends up paying for it. In the end, it's not just the businesses that end up paying, it's the shareholders, the customers, etc., etc. So the idea that you can raise a lot more money for government to spend without all of us feeling it somehow even
Right.
if it's not directly. That's the bit which the experts say, look, hang on, you're pushing it too far. Also true of both parties, that they've said they want to spend lots of money on things where they just haven't said where the money is
How
going to
or
come
where,
from.
yeah.
So the Conservatives are making this claim that nobody will need to sell their house to pay for social care.
Mm-hmm.
The Institute for Fiscal Studies describes that as little more than an uncosted aspiration. It's a slogan.
Wow.
There's nothing to back it up. And Labour has made this promise that the WASPy women, the women affected by pension age changes, will be, in their words, compensated. But there's no pot of money to do that.
To the tune
with,
of £58 billion.
which over a long period of time,
Yeah.
but nonetheless, that is proper money.
But at least they've come out, have they not, and said they're not sort of saying we'll find some way. They have been clear saying that we'll raise the money by borrowing it.
I mean, essentially, by default, they have to acknowledge that.
But
that
they've said they see it as a moral obligation, and it's a cost that needs to be paid.
But that comes outside of their
Already
supposed
costed,
detailed financial plans. So we just need to be a bit careful about taking what they say they can do at face value and saying, OK. But what we can say is that these two parties have dramatically different approaches to where they want to take the country. And instead of debating the exact number of nurses here or the exact whatever somewhere else, it would have been nice to hear them seriously engage in those different visions they have for where they want to take the country, because that's important.
Before we go to our first break, let's just deal with one of them here, the top one on Brexit. He listed some of the suggested... this is Boris Johnson listing some of the suggested benefits of Brexit, including that it would enable the UK to create free ports around the country. What are free ports?
I know, right? I mean, how did this become a headline? So a free port is when you can bring something into the country without formally crossing the border for customs purposes and having to go through clearance and pay tariffs and that kind of thing. Why would you want to do that? Let's say you're a manufacturer and you're building a car, and bits of the engine come from one place and bits of the frame of the body come from another place and all the rest of it. Different countries, I mean. If you have to go through the import rules in all of those countries before you can bring your car together, it's busy, it's complicated, it's expensive. A free port lets you keep your stuff outside of the formal customs arrangements so that you can manufacture it, bring all the stuff, all the parts from different countries into one place and build it.
But, sorry, forgive me, stupid question, but you'd need to manufacture it at the free port, right?
Yeah,
because it can't move away from the free port.
Exactly. So a free port is an area. It's not literally kind of docks on the seaside. It's an area that's designated for these purposes.
Okay.
The important thing is there are about 80 free ports in the EU already.
Right.
So it's not something you can't do in the EU. EU free ports have tighter rules than ones elsewhere in the world, but it's not that free ports don't exist in the EU. In fact, in the UK, we had them until 2012.
Right, so this whole idea that we need to leave the EU to create more free ports...
Not really.
It doesn't really work like that, because we can create free ports whilst being in the EU. Okay. All right, we're going to take a quick break. I know you've got some questions that you've sent in, which I will put to Will. Keep them coming. 0344 499 1000 is the number you need to speak to Will and I, or you could tweet us here at Talk Radio.
This is Talk Radio. The Alexis Conran Show on Talk Radio with The Times and The Sunday Times. Know your times.
Unlimit the tunes you love this Christmas on Vodafone. With Spotify Premium included on our unlimited data plans with entertainment. The future is exciting. Ready? Vodafone.
Available on Unlimited and Unlimited Max Plan. Maximum download speed applies to unlimited plan. Speed and coverage may vary. Full terms on Unlimited and Entertainment at vodafone.co.uk/unlimited.
We've got something to tell you about the Honda Jazz. We know it looks small, but inside, it's really big. That's why we've created the small but big Jazz event, where you can get 0% APR representative and 5 years complimentary servicing on all grades until the 31st of January. The Honda Jazz, the small car with the big offer. Visit your local dealer to find out more. Honda dealers are credit brokers, not lenders. Finance provided by Honda Finance Europe, authorised and regulated by the Financial Conduct Authority. Terms and conditions apply.
Painkillers. Allergy relief. Viagra Connect.
Yes, you can now buy Viagra Connect without prescription from your local Lloyd's pharmacy or at Lloyd's pharmacy within Sainsbury's. Simple, convenient and available now. Lloyd's Pharmacy. How are you today?
Contains sildenafil for erectile dysfunction in adult men. Subject to suitability. Always read the leaflet.
Hello, I'm Jo Brand. When I see people homeless over Christmas, I find it really upsetting. Whether they're sleeping in doorways, on buses or in hostels, it just shouldn't be happening. But it doesn't have to be like this. This Christmas, crisis centres across Britain are providing warmth and safety, plus long-term support to find people a job and a home. Please reserve a place for someone at Crisis this Christmas for just £28.87. Go to crisis.org.uk now. Thank you.
Talk Radio Traffic and Travel.
In Greater Manchester on the M60 clockwise at junction 13 for Worsley, there's an accident, which means the entry slip is currently blocked. The M11 southbound in Essex has delays following an earlier breakdown between junction 5 for Loughton and junction 4 for the North Circular. In Essex on the M25 clockwise at junction 27 for the M11, 2 lanes remain closed for barrier repairs, congestion's back to junction 26. And in London, the A4 Great West Road heading out of town from Hammersmith to Chiswick is very busy because of a rolling roadblock. I'm Michael Page.
Good weekend?
Yeah, just put the tree up. You?
Well, I plumbed in a sub-zero microclimate to the lounge, so there's a perfect dusting of snow on the luscious boughs of our Norwegian spruce come the big day. Then the kids and I had an indoor snowball fight, much to the annoyance of the Arctic puffin we've temporarily rehomed. He prefers to watch Christmas films.
Right. Like going all out at Christmas? Try the new Chicken Deluxe. Succulent crispy chicken, cheese, red onion, lettuce, mayo and a zesty tomato relish. Only at McDonald's. Ends 1st of January, served after 11 a.m, subject to availability, participating restaurants only.
Outspoken opinions and decisive debate. The Alexis Conran Show on Talk Radio.
Welcome back to the show with me, Alexis Conran, here on Talk Radio. You're listening to Talk Politics with The Times. Be well informed. With me, I have Will Moy, CEO of Full Fact. And we are going to continue to do some more fact-checking. We've got a couple of questions coming in from some listeners, which I will put to Will in a moment. We started the show by asking you, what do you hope to wake up to on Friday the 13th? A couple more of your messages here. Dean on YouTube says, everybody thinks that Labour will get kicked on election day. They will surprise a lot of people. PH on YouTube says, Northwest Labour voter here. I'm voting Brexit Party. So are all my family and friends. Hercule. What a cool name. Hercule on Twitter says, another hung parliament, so the fighting continues until the next election. Hercule maybe could be right. Yoo-hoo on Twitter says, a Labour government with Jeremy Corbyn as our long-awaited Prime Minister. DR on Twitter says, JC, Jeremy Corbyn, I assume, stepping down as leader of the Labour Party. NHS. Oh, here we go. So here's the question for you, Will. This has come in. Fred on YouTube says, NHS is at risk by spending 26% of its budget on private care at high rates.
Okay. So this relates to something Jeremy Corbyn said on Friday's debate, where he said that the Health and Social Care Act of 2012 has led to £10 billion of private sector involvement in the NHS. £10 billion is 7.3% of the budget. So that compares to, is it Joe? Sorry?
It's Fred.
Fred, saying 26%. Jeremy Corbyn's quoting the lowest possible number you can give for private provider involvement in the NHS, that 10 billion, that 7%. You can measure this in a few different ways, and it goes up the more you decide to count, essentially. So it starts with what does get commission from the independent private providers by the NHS itself. Then you can add in what gets commission from local councils. If you then add what the NHS Trust spend on outsourcing, and start expanding the range of things so that you're including things you might not necessarily think of, such as pharmacists, in your measures, then you can add up to, according to a measure done at the LSE, 26% of the health budget is being spent on some kind of private provider. Now, the argument is it's still free at the point of use, and you've got people basically competing to provide the same service. So, you know, the end user experience doesn't change. But it's absolutely true that the role of private provision in the NHS has been increasing, and actually has been increasing steadily for quite a long time. Where Jeremy Corbyn pushed it too far was by saying the Health and Social Care Act of 2012 was what kicked this all off. Right. Actually, this has been going on since the noughties. So the previous Labour government had was really
opened it up to
had a big role in increasing private provision, and it's actually, if anything, flattened off a little bit in the last couple of years. But it's a big part of how the NHS delivers its services now.
It's a strange thing again, isn't it, about the privatisation of the NHS, which is, if you could say that the slogan for the Conservatives is "Get Brexit Done," you would say that the phrase that Labour Party has chosen to run on, which is, not for sale when it comes to the NHS.
Absolutely.
But would it be fair to say that a privatisation of the NHS can mean a lot of different things to different people? The sort of the selling off of the NHS. We already have private companies providing a lot of services for the NHS. So is that privatisation?
And that is absolutely for your listeners to decide. That's exactly the point. Do you think that there is a point of principle which says that if it's not provided by people in the public sector working under a kind of public sector motivation, then it's not really an NHS? Or do you say the point of principle is it's free at the point of use, it's ultimately taxpayer funded, and who ends up delivering the service isn't the point? People have very different points of view about that, and that's a political choice.
And I think, again, this was a point that we were talking about with Sam Lister and James Meadway earlier on in the show. And again, this is purely my view, and I'm not going to drag you impartial fact checkers into it, but I don't think we're ever going to see an NHS that's not free at the point of use, and that doesn't mean that it can't be privatised. There will always be a free at the point of use National Health Service, but what you may see is tiered privatisation where, yes, you can go the free way, but you can choose to pay a little bit of money in order to jump the queue, for example.
Can I just mention dentists to you?
Is that what we already have with dentists?
Well, we pay for dentist appointments, don't we? They're not free at the point of use.
Children don't.
Children don't, I think.
Yeah.
And also, a lot of people pay prescription charges. So there are places where there is charging on the NHS, dentistry being the really obvious one that affects everybody. So it's just worth remembering, if you're talking about that kind of, will anyone ever be charged, will it all be free at the point of use, that isn't a sort of big lever that all gets flipped in one go. It could be changed in different places in small ways.
Okay. Let's look at one of Jeremy Corbyn's claims in the debate. He said that it would take Boris Johnson 7 years to negotiate a Canada-style trade deal with the EU.
Yep, here we go with getting Brexit done is not an event, and don't hold your breath. Both parties want you to know that Brexit will be sorted out very soon after they get elected, one way or the other. The Conservatives have their so-called oven-ready deal already negotiated with the EU. They want to get it through Parliament by the end of January. If they succeed, the UK will have left the EU. The Labour Party want to negotiate a new deal, put it to a referendum, and after 6 months the referendum happens. Ambitious timetable, but if they succeed, if we vote to remain, it's all over. If we vote for their deal, then they're both Conservatives and Labour then are in the same situation of having to actually negotiate the future trading relationship with the EU. Now, we are currently in a transition period with the EU that goes to the end of next year. It can be extended by either 1 year or two. And in that period, follow EU rules, pay money to the EU. That's what happens the moment the exit agreement is made, and we have at that time to negotiate a deal. If we can't do it in that time, it's a bit messy. Now, Canada, when it negotiated a trade deal with the EU, took 5 years and then 2 years to implement that deal, 7 years in total. That's what Jeremy Corbyn is talking about. The available time to negotiate this deal is less, but we'll have to see whether they can actually pull that off.
Now, I've asked this question before to Conservative Party members and Conservative candidates, and the reply I get is it's not going to take 7 years because we are already aligned with the EU. So we're starting from a level playing field, if you like. We're not going to have to change everything in our manufacturing, our society, the way we do things in order to meet EU standards. So we're already aligned. Therefore, we can do a deal much quicker. But my question then becomes, Brexit has always been about not aligning ourselves with the EU, and actually, if we remained aligned, President Trump has already said if you remain aligned, we can't have a free trade agreement with the US, or words to that effect. It's going to make it very difficult. If we remain aligned, it makes it harder for us to go out and do our own trade deals with other people. So is there any fact-checking to be done on that?
Yeah, I asked Professor Anna Menon, who is the leader of the UK in a Changing Europe group of academics who study Brexit. His view, and that of other trade negotiation experts, is the EU doesn't really care where we are now. It cares where we want to end up. And that's what the negotiation is about. So the fact that we're aligned now doesn't make that much difference to the real challenge, which is agreeing where we want to end up. And you're absolutely right to say there are then trade-offs. If we do one kind of deal with the EU that keeps us very close to the EU and makes trading with the EU easier, it's harder to be closely aligned to the US, which has very different rules, and then make trading with the US easier. So when we start negotiating trade deals separately from the EU, which we will do when and if we leave the EU, then we are going to have to make trade-offs between the different deals we do with different countries. And of course, because we're negotiating simultaneously with lots of different countries, you can imagine that other countries might look at what we're offering in one place and say, well, we want this or we want that. So it won't be an easy job for somebody, and there are real trade-offs there. Just by the way, my colleague Joe has come back and explained that you don't pay for NHS dental treatment if you're under 18 or still in full-time education and under 19, if you're pregnant and had a baby in the last 12 months, if you're being treated in an NHS hospital, if you're on low-income benefits. But the rest of us pay for NHS dentistry.
Which is a form of privatisation, I guess, on there.
That's your shout.
The other thing I wanted to quickly... we've got some questions coming in thick and fast, so I'm going to get those to you in a second. But the other thing, is it also true that when it comes to our free trade agreements, that so far there's only been about a dozen that have been rolled over or to a certain degree provisionally agreed, but I'm not. My question is not about how many so far, but it's also fair to say that there are countries that are saying, "Look, we will wait to do a free trade agreement with you because we want to see what your relationship with the EU is going to be first."
Yeah, that's
does that actually? Is that true?
That's right. So what the government is doing at the moment is rolling over trade agreements that the EU already has with other countries in order to preserve the trading relationships we already have. But as you say, and including the US, there are countries waiting to see what the trade agreement with the EU is because it determines the space they can play in negotiating with us. If we do a trade deal with the EU, which keeps us closely aligned to the EU and requires us to therefore have the same or similar arrangements on things like the safety of goods and stuff like that, or manufacturing standards or anything like that, then that stops us having the same setup as you have in other countries. So,
okay. Let's take a quick call. Harry's called from Portsmouth. Harry, welcome to the show. What would you like to say?
Oh, thank you, Alexis. I've been listening recently to these tree pledges different parties have made.
Yeah.
Now,
Will's got his head in his hands, by the way. As you mentioned the word trees, I saw him physically collapse. Yes.
Well, they're very organic, aren't they? They once they start growing, you don't know where they're going to go.
But go on, what's your question?
Well, I'm taking the Labour pledge as being the biggest pledge. Now, these governments only last for 5 years. They all seem to want to commit to tree planting by other governments in the future. But the agricultural land, has Labour done any sort of survey on the agricultural land? There's different grades. You can't plant trees on hillsides because the soil's too thin. Have they done anything? Because I think all these tree pledges have appeared since the Extinction Rebellion has come about. I can't remember tree pledges from 2 years ago.
OK, Harry, thank you for your question. I'm going to put it to Will, who's typed furiously away. It's 2 billion trees from Labour. I think a lot of people have gone out and done sort of maths and gone, oh, that means everybody has... It's important to say there is a story from Ethiopia that managed to plant 350 million trees in a day. So the actual physicality of planting the trees is possible, but Harry raises a good point there. All these pledges that are going to be done over a series of years, extending beyond the 5-year government period, and with the rule that we have that one government can't bind the hands of another, how do these things work?
Well, I mean, do you want your government to just say we're just going to do 5 years of stuff and then myopically stop, or do you want them to have a longer term ambition for the country? I think whether it's for long-term future of the NHS or how we're going to pay for care for elderly people or how we're going to tackle climate change, lots of these things can't be done in 5 years. Completely reasonable for them to say what they will do in the longer run if they stay in government forever, as long as they're clear what they're actually going to do in the next 5 years about it. So let's talk about tree planting, because I completely agree. I was bewildered by the number of parties that suddenly got their kind of gardener's world hat on and decided that pledging to plant however many trees was the new focus of the general election. So we learned a bit about tree planting. As you say, Labour want to plant 2 billion new trees by 2040.
Yeah.
It's unlikely they'll be in government that entire time, but who knows? It's in the hands of the voters. This is equivalent to about 300,000 trees a day. So possible. The BBC once led an initiative which planted an estimated 230,000 trees in an hour in 2009, mainly using volunteers. In Turkey, there was a programme which planted 300,000 trees in an hour in 2019. So it is physically possible to plant that many trees. Whether or not there's enough space, curious thing, somewhere between 88% and 99% of the UK is not developed, i.e. doesn't have tarmac or concrete on it or bricks. So, in theory, there's a lot of
physical
space in the world
for that to be.
But exactly what it is you want to turn into big forests and where you want to plant these things is a whole other question. As a very, and I can't stress enough how rough, but very rough estimate, Labour's plan is about 5% of the country being covered in trees.
There you go. Thank you for that. And thank you for that, Harry. I'm going to move on because we are actually having plenty of questions coming in thick and fast. Martin on Twitter asked a very good question that I've heard asked, and I've heard a lot of people giving their opinions on this, but it'll be interesting to see what Full Fact have to say. Could you please ask Will whether it is possible for Labour to nationalise the utilities railways whilst under EU governance, as it is my understanding that it is not possible whilst we are in the EU. I could be wrong. I love the fact that in the end he's put comma, I could be wrong, because that, to me, says I am willing to listen and change my mind based on facts.
Yes, and thank you. And wouldn't it be lovely if we all lived up to that all of the time, including some of our leaders? I'll tell you what I can tell you, and I'll tell you I am not an EU lawyer, so I don't know the legal rules that cover this. We can find an EU lawyer and ask them for you, and we will do that, and we will make sure it goes up on our website before
it's a question that's been doing the rounds a lot.
Yeah, and it's an important one. The thing I'd point out is there are lots of countries in which many of the things that Labour want to have nationalised are nationalised in the EU.
Germany has got nationalised railways, utility companies.
Exactly. So the idea that it's impossible strikes me as unlikely. There may well be rules about how you can do it, who you have to compensate, compensating the current shareholders and that kind of thing. But it's clearly possible to have nationalised at least many of the things that Labour want to nationalise and be members of the EU. So I'm not exactly sure if there's a trade-off there or where it might be, but it's certainly not the case that Labour couldn't do any of what it's planning to do within the EU, because other countries do.
I remember, and I don't know if this is any help for you, Martin, but I remember the 2017 Labour manifesto that was looked at closely to see if it was able to be implemented whilst our membership in the EU continued. And they found, I think, all but one of the pledges were fully implementable, and that one pledge would have had to get some sort of sign-off from the EU. But essentially there wasn't anything in there that was too radical that you couldn't carry out in the EU. One last one here that's just come in for you, Will, and this is from Kathy Hillier. She says, attached is a Tory claim regarding 5,000 or 4,000 £8 encourages the voter to think this is extra, but provides no comparison against current figures with no context. It seems meaningless. And it says money for every pupil, school funding, is increasing by $14 billion. Each secondary school pupil will receive at least $5,000 next year. Each primary school pupil will receive $4,000 by 2021 to 2022. This particularly helps North East Somerset, Jacob Rees-Mogg territory. Has anyone seen Jacob Rees-Mogg, by the way? Where is he? Which has historically been underfunded. There's also $400 million extra for the education of 16 to 19-year-olds, including further education, sixth form colleges, to give young people the skills they need. I think what... I'm just going to get the name back up there. Kathy wants to know, this $5,000 per pupil in primary school and $4,000 per primary school and other years, $5,000. Does it stand up?
Well, the 14 billion certainly doesn't stand up. It's, again, to quote my favourite group of economists, the Institute for Fiscal Studies, they've summed this up perfectly. It's somewhere between meaningless and misleading. What they're doing is...
That is damning.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree more.
Okay.
What they're doing is adding up 3 years' worth of spending increases and ignoring inflation all in one go. That is
Which
not...
is always the case. I mean, every time I ask you anything, it's like, yeah, that is the figure. But when you take real cost and inflation and everything, it just doesn't add up.
And in this case, for bonus points, they've inflated it by adding up more than 1 year and claiming that as a total figure, which I think gives a unrealistic view of it. So education spending will actually, in real terms, after adjusting for inflation, be £4.3 billion higher in 2022 to 2023. It's worth saying that since 2009-10, school spending per pupil, which is what the original claim was about, has fallen by 8% in England. And what these new spending plans do is pretty close to reversing those cuts by 2022, 2023. So rather like with policing, what we're really doing is getting back up to a previous level.
I was about to say that it seems that we are being promised basically going back up to what we had before the austerity cuts. But we can safely say to Kathy Hillier, who contacted us on Twitter with her question, and she's screenshotted the Conservative pamphlet that must have come through her door, that $5,000 per pupil per year and $4,000 for primary school is nonsense because it comes from the claim that school funding is increasing by $14 billion each. And that, as you heard from Will and the IFS, is, how did you put it?
Somewhere between meaningless and misleading, I think, was the line.
That is quite... I think that's more than a slap on the wrist.
Yes.
That's a kick in the shins.
It's a please really stop doing this.
Please stop doing that.
Just back on the railway thing, by the way. My colleagues have been looking into this.
Is this the nationalisation?
Nationalisation in general.
So that was Martin's question.
You do what you want to do?
Martin's question, which was, can Jeremy Corbyn really carry out nationalisation of utilities and railways if we're still members of the EU?
And the answer seems to be that yes, you can. But there are two things you have to bear in mind. One is there are regulations for each of those different sectors which might limit exactly what you can do. So, for example, there might be rules saying that there has to be levels of competition for who gets to provide things and that kind of thing. There was a big debate about that in railway rules for the EU, for example, and Germany actually stepped in to protect the way they run their railways, so that didn't go ahead. The other thing you need to bear in mind about this is that because you have to compensate the existing investors in the private firms, there will be, and this is quoting an analysis in the Financial Times, a considerable transfer of wealth from the taxpayers to investors.
Because basically you're going to have to pay them off.
Yeah, exactly.
They're going to say, if we want to take it into public ownership, we're going to have to pay off the people who own it at the moment.
Exactly.
But of course, it doesn't sort of solve the question of why the French seem to have their own railways and the Germans, but they also, some French companies and Chinese companies and German companies own railways in this country, but we don't seem to be able to own our own railways.
Well, we can if we want to.
We can if we want to. Okay.
And on Thursday, you get to decide.
You get to decide where our railways goes, amongst other things. We'll take a quick break, but keep your questions coming. Will is staying with me up until 1 o'clock, after which Jamie East will be in the studio taking you all the way up till 4 o'clock. 0344 499 1000 is the number you need, or you could tweet us your question at Talk Radio.
Countdown to the election on Talk Radio.
The manifestos, the mandates, the mother of all radio stations.
Up to the minute breaking news and instant reaction. Your election station, Talk Radio. The Alexis Conran Show on Talk Radio with The Times and The Sunday Times. Know your times.
Today, it's Aston Villa v Leicester and Brighton v Wolves in a cracking double-header. And with Now TV, you can watch both games live for a one-off payment of just $9.99. Hold on, they're checking with VAR.
That's confirmed, it's $9.99.
Good call, game on. So, to only pay for the games that matter to you, grab a Now TV Sky Sports Day Pass. Search Now TV Sports. 18 plus, content streamed via internet, full terms apply.
Winter's arrived. There's a cold front a-coming. The heating's turned on and the meter is turning. You need to stay warm for as cheap as you can. It pays to shop round for your best power plan. Switchcraft.co.uk can find you a great energy plan this winter and keep you on great deals automatically, saving you an average of £268 a year to spend on other things, like Christmas. Best of all, it's absolutely free. Switchcraft.co.uk, the one-stop, no-hassle route to great energy deals this winter. See if you could start saving now at switchcraft.co.uk and outsmart the energy companies.
Your online life is slick and on point. Just how you like it. Except your email. That's a right mess. Chaos. The new Yahoo Mail app will sort all of that out. Gmail account, AOL, Outlook, stick them all on there. Looking for something? Boom! There it is. Need that ticket right now? Whoa! It's already there. And you can unsubscribe from the junk in one tap. We've rethought your email and your life just got tidier. Download the Yahoo Mail app now.
Talk Radio, traffic and travel.
In Hampshire, it's very slow on the M3 northbound, coming from junction 13 at Eastleigh up to junction 11 for Winchester South. And there are delays on the M25 clockwise in Essex, approaching junction 27 for the M11. That's because the two outside lanes remain closed for barrier repairs. Congestion back to junction 26. The M11 southbound between junction 5 for Loughton and junction 4 for the North Circular heading into London is slow following an earlier breakdown. And in Greater Manchester on the M60 clockwise at junction 13 for Worsley, the entry slip remains closed because of an accident. I'm Michael Page.
OK, guitars. Good. Now, keys. Strings. And voices. Alicia. And doorbell.
Hello?
Like going all out at Christmas? Try the Big Tasty with bacon. A beef patty, Emmental cheese, tomato, lettuce, onion and Big Tasty sauce. Only at McDonald's. Ends 1st of January, served after 11 a.m, subject to availability, participating restaurants only.
Sunday evenings with Giles Conran on Talk Radio.
This is a radio show, and I haven't done my hair.
Essential debate and topical talk from the presenter everyone's talking about.
So I just wanted to marry anybody I could marry. And they'd come around and they'd just see this man lives in this house, and as psycho as this.
Giles Conran.
You fill your boots, mate. I'm certainly not filling mine.
Giles Conran, tonight from 7 on Talk Radio. Outspoken opinions and decisive debate. The Alexis Conran Show on Talk Radio.
Welcome back to the last part of the show with me, Alexis Conran, here on Talk Radio. You're listening to Talk Politics with The Times. Be well informed. With me, I have Will Moyes, CEO of Full Fact, and we have been dealing with your questions. Thank you for those. There have been loads of questions coming in. I did ask the question of where is Jacob Rees-Mogg, and Tony quite kindly from Hampshire says that Jacob Rees-Mogg is holed up with Diane Abbott and Emily Thornberry. I'm sure they're having a great time together. Made me chuckle, Tony. Thank you. We have another question for you, Will, along with a screenshot, and this comes from one of our Twitter followers. And it says the latest election leaflets in North East Somerset attached came through my door yesterday. The latest of many misleading Liberal Democrat leaflets. Candidate is now citing Paddy Power. It's a misrepresentation to mislead voters. Also, the Survation poll referred to has already been widely criticised. Now, it's a screenshot of a leaflet. It is saying the Lib Dems won both elections in North East Somerset in May 2019, local council and European. And it's also giving the stats there that Labour are 20-1 outsiders in North East Somerset, but it cites Paddy Power. That's a gambling firm.
Yeah, so a few things going on here.
Yeah.
People do bet on the outcomes of elections, and sometimes the betting markets are effective at predicting what will happen, and sometimes they're not.
Yeah.
Polls, proper polls, not things that are done on Twitter, but proper polling is designed to actually be representative of what's going on. So what we've got in this leaflet is yes, proclaim that Labour are 20-1 outsiders on Paddy Power in North East Somerset. That is the latest Paddy Power odds for North Somerset. Whether that should be any use to you in deciding how to vote is entirely up to you. I think you should probably vote based on whether or not you like the candidates, the parties and the manifestos, but that's your call. Then the Lib Dems have got a bar chart showing the results of the previous local elections to try to show that the Lib Dems and the Conservatives are neck and neck in that constituency. The idea that the local elections, in which far fewer people vote, are a good guide to this general election with everything that's at stake is far-fetched. But the point they're trying to make is that the most likely challenger to the Conservative Party in North East Somerset is the Liberal Democrats, not the Labour Party. That is actually backed up by a piece of independent research by Survation. Now, how do you know whether to trust a poll? One of the better clues is whether or not the pollster that did it is a member of the British Polling Council, because the British Polling Council requires pollsters to publish all the details of the questions they asked and the answers they got. So we can see that Survation did a poll, and we can see that they did it on the 16th and 17th of October, so quite a long time ago now, which showed that given the North East Somerset constituency and listing the candidates who were there, Conservatives were most likely to win with 44%, Labour with 28%, Liberal Democrats with 28%, and Labour with 14%. So it puts the Liberal Democrat Party as a clear second and most likely challenger to Conservatives. Why is your Twitter person saying this poll has been widely criticised? Because of a previous Lib Dem leaflet in that constituency, which took another question from that poll, which said that if no one else had a chance of winning...
That's the one, yes.
Yeah. If no one else had a chance of winning and you were forced to either vote Conservative or Liberal Democrat, which would you go for? Which produced a much tighter race. And they shoved that in a bar chart on a leaflet to try to claim that it was a tighter race than it actually is. So the Liberal Democrats have been using these kinds of tactics very aggressively to try to suggest that they're competitive in places. They are the second most likely challenger in the North East Somerset, but the reason the poll has got a bad reputation is the Liberal Democrats' own behaviour gave it a bad reputation. Most important thing is please don't be put off voting by any of these tactics.
And we've already had a couple of messages of people saying, I've had enough, I'm not going to vote, which is a bit of a shame. Let's move on to some of the claims that we heard from the debate. Are there any that we've done a little bit of Brexit, so let's move away from Brexit. Jeremy Corbyn, and I've just been saying this as well, but he said that the UK is the world's fifth richest country. Is that still accurate? Can we say that?
No, now you have to choose. It used to be the 5th or the 8th, and now you have to choose between the 6th and the 9th.
What?
Yeah. So let me unpack that a bit. Obviously,
this is what drives me mad about this. It's either one or the other.
You would think.
Yeah.
So we've moved down a slot. Obviously, countries get bigger, countries get smaller, that happens. Why the 6th or the 9th? There are two different ways of comparing currencies. Because obviously we're working in sterling, other countries are working in euros and dollars and all kinds of other things. You can make the currency comparison in two different ways. And depending on how you equalise it all out, we can either end up as the 6th biggest economy or the 9th biggest economy. The key point is that we're one of the richest countries in the world.
Right.
It is worth saying, though, because the context in which Jeremy Corbyn made this point was a point about inequality. If you actually take the size of the economy per head in this country, the UK comes out as either the 20th or the 27th richest country in the world. So per head, we're actually a lot less well off than we are overall as a country.
Oh, I see. So you're taking the GDP and you're spreading it
Dividing
equally
it by the population.
Yeah. And on that chart, we're the 20th or the 27th.
Yeah.
I see. Okay. I haven't heard of that one before. So we do another one. We've done the hospitals to death. I want to leave that there because I think we're just never going to... Boris Johnson repeated his party's policy to put 20,000 more officers on the streets. Whilst Jeremy Corbyn pointed out that the police had been cut by such massive numbers. You fact-checked that? What are the actual numbers there?
That's right. That is the Conservative pledge, and it would effectively restore the number of police officers that we had 10 years ago in 2010. Because the population has grown, we'd have slightly fewer police officers then per head of population than we did 10 years ago, but it would essentially put the policing numbers back up to the 2010 levels.
Jeremy Corbyn also mentioned that we are seriously overcrowded prisons. We have lost prison officers.
We really do, and we have 56% of prisons in England and Wales are overcrowded. If you look into the details of what it's like in prison, there is a real mess. But this is not something new. The overall prison population has been above what is considered uncrowded capacity almost constantly for decades.
So we have indeed been having, 56% of prisons, you're saying, are overcrowded.
Yeah.
So that's not a disputed figure.
That's not disputed, and it's also not new, which is important too.
There was a figure, I know we don't have it on here, but I'm trusting that you may be able to pull the fact-checking, because I did see that a fact-checking, so I don't know, I can't remember whether it was full fact or not, but Jeremy Corbyn referred to 4 million children living in poverty. Some people picked this up and said, and again, these are some of the things that are so unhelpful for the general public when people start talking about absolute poverty. Because again, a little bit like the crime figures, there's two different sets of rules that you can judge them on. You know, the crime survey and the reported crime, which they never correlate. But the 4 million children living in poverty, true or not?
True.
True.
Yeah, on the official,
that was pretty unequivocal.
On the official measure of children in poverty, there are 4.1 million children in poverty living in a household on relatively low income. Mm-hmm. Now, it is worth saying there are other ways of measuring poverty. For example, the Independent Social Metrics Commission suggests that with other living costs factored in, around 4.6 million children could be in poverty. So, yes, it's a completely fair claim to make. And just in defence of statistics, just think about trying to count the number of poor people in a country. You have to make all kinds of decisions about who counts and who doesn't and exactly how you define that and all the rest of it. It's reasonable to think there isn't just one right number for something like this, but it does make it harder to kind of come on and just say unequivocal things. We have to do justice to all of that complexity.
But that 4 million children,
reasonable claim.
It's a completely reasonable claim that he can say without fear of being fact-checked and corrected.
Yeah.
In the 6th or 9th most prosperous country in the world.
Yes.
Extraordinary. Thank you, Will. We've used up all our time. Absolute pleasure to have you here. We will continue our fact-checking, I think, beyond the election, so we'll keep you listeners posted, but thank you for now to Will Moy, Chief Executive of Full Fact.
Thank you, and if you follow up on fullfact.org, we'll put in a quick post with some of the sources for these.
Absolutely. Do give Full Fact a follow on Twitter and regularly check their website. It's very easy. You can just get on there on the search bar. You can just ask a question and their algorithm or whatever clever people run it have made it very easy for the relevant articles to come up. You don't even have to search in technical terms. Just ask the question and you're going to get the relevant articles. Thank you for all your texts, your calls, your questions. In a couple of amusing things. What do you expect? What do you hope for on Friday morning? David on Twitter says the impending arrival of a meteor. Well, we'll soon know. Thank you.
This is Talk Radio. The Alexis Conran Show on Talk Radio with The Times and The Sunday Times. Know your times.
The spacious Vauxhall Grandland X is available for £299 initial rental and £299 a month. Great when you have lots to fit in. Like now. Personal contract hire on Grandland X SRI nav 1.2 130 PS. Subject to status, T's and C's 18+. Initial rental 299 plus 47 months at 299. 32,000 total contracted mileage. You will not own the car. Vauxhall Finance Leasing. Availability is limited, so search Grandland X offer or visit your